This was in 2019. Me and my buddy Jackson have a hobby for exploring abandoned places. I guess we were urban explorers, but we weren't really the type to do anything too illegal, or at least nothing too risky, which usually meant finding places further out from the city and in more remote areas. For this one, Jackson and I had found a small Reddit thread of a fire lookout tower posted in the community for abandoned places in our state. The OP didn't mention where it was though, and seemed like he was trying to keep it from being too available to everyone online. I tried my luck at messaging him directly, and although he was hesitant, I eventually was able to get the coordinates from him, so long as I didn't pass it around to everyone else and ruin the spot. When we looked it up on maps, we could see there was a structure there, so it all looked legit. There weren't any other posts or anything on it though, so it really seemed like the place was completely forgotten. We packed up and headed out there on a Monday morning. Getting there was a bit sketchy. No trails really, and no clear sightlines of where we were headed. Just had to trust the GPS. The woods also had this really strange feeling. If Jackson wasn't there with me, I 100% would have booked it out of there and never looked back, just from the feeling alone. Jackson also said he felt off, but we still continued walking. All the way up until just about a minute from the fire lookout, there were no signs whatsoever that we were even remotely in the right place, or going in the right direction. No signs of trails, footpaths, or views of the structure. Nothing. It wasn't until we were literally 30 feet from it that we even saw it for the first time. We reached a clearing in the trees, and on the hill was, well, the lookout tower. It wasn't exactly the kind we were hoping for, but I was just happy it existed and the GPS got us there. This one wasn't sitting on tall stilts. It was basically just a cabin on top of the hill, with a view over the forest. We circled the tower for a minute. The wood siding was gray and splintered, and the windows were either broken or covered in grime and fog so thick that it looked painted over. One side of the roof was even partially caved in, and the whole place sort of felt like it was leaning slightly, like the whole structure had shifted on its foundation. Jackson was noticeably more excited than I was. I think I still had that lingering, uneasy feeling from the woods, but I didn't want to be a buzzkill after we'd come out all this way, so I didn't say anything. Jackson knocked on the door, then opened it. We stepped in. The inside was dark. Even though windows surrounded pretty much all sides, the fog and grime that I mentioned earlier prevented pretty much any light from coming in. There was also a bunch of junk scattered on the floor. Some old tools, a broken lantern, and even some beer cans that looked decades old. But eerily, there was a piece of paper taped to the far wall. It was noticeably out of place, being clean and new from someone recently. On it were 3 words: "Hope you're happy." I showed it to Jackson, and we both were pretty confused. I mean, clearly this had to be the stupid Redditor messing with us, leaving a cryptic note to scare us, knowing that we were gonna show up. Still kinda weird though. If it wasn't some joke, it seemed sort of passive-aggressive. Anyway, the sun was getting low, so I shut the door and we settled in for the night. I got out the camping stove and started boiling water to make ramen for dinner. Strangely, that whole night felt off. We didn't really talk for a while. I made the food, we ate, and just sat there, listening to the breeze make the cabin walls creak. Neither of us sparked up a conversation, which was really unusual. Just felt like there was almost this dreadful feeling. And I can't speak for Jackson, but I assume he felt it too, since he didn't speak either. Eventually, when it got later, we both got in our sleeping bags and fell asleep. When I woke up, I remember opening my eyes to the pitch black room and hearing just the slight creaks of the cabin. but something felt like it was missing, and that's when I rolled over and looked at Jackson's empty sleeping bag. I quickly sat up and looked around. "Jackson?" It was quiet. I froze up for a moment. "Jackson?" After I said his name again, there was a sudden thud against the wood. Then again. I tilted my head up and looked at the roof. Slow, quiet thuds moved across the ceiling. And then, suddenly the door opened and Jackson stepped inside, nearly giving me a heart attack. He looked surprised to see me awake, but I told him to shush before he said anything. But whatever the hell I'd been hearing had stopped. Jackson said he just went out to take a leak. I asked if he saw anything on the roof, and he looked at me like I was crazy. I went out to see for myself, and saw nothing. At that point, I thought maybe I was crazy. We got back in our sleeping bags and slept through the rest of the night. Next day, things still felt a little off there. I really didn't know what it was. Just everything felt too quiet and still. Me and Jackson spent most of the day exploring around the area, walking around and looking for anything else cool, but there really wasn't anything. The forest seemed to be the same half-dead trees for miles and miles and miles. Around sundown again, we got back to the lookout tower, ready to get back inside and settle for the night. But as Jackson went to close the door, he suddenly stopped. I looked back at him. He was frozen in place, and his eyes were fixed on something. Then he said my name, telling me to come over there. I walked over and looked out the doorway. Standing maybe 40 feet from the cabin, right on the line between the clearing and the trees, there was a man. The man had shaggy, unkempt hair and a scraggly beard. He wore a gray flannel and had a rifle slung over his shoulder. Clearly, this guy was some sort of hunter. But what was really eerie was the look he had over his face. His eyes were dead, and he had a dreadful, empty look. "Hey, can we help you? Are you good?" I called out. The guy stared across the field at us for a few more seconds, then slowly turned and walked straight into the woods. I looked at Jackson, and both of us were a little unsure about that guy. We made food and stayed in for a couple hours. We were a little more conversational, talking about our plan to leave tomorrow morning, and definitely not recommend anyone to ever come here. And during that conversation, a faint shadow suddenly moved across Jackson's face. I quickly turned around and looked at the window behind me. Could barely see anything through it, but there was a shape, maybe a figure, moving along the outer wall. Jackson was quiet, so I knew he saw it too. The figure moved all the way around to where the door was. My heart was racing. There was a long pause, then 3 soft knocks against the door. Jackson immediately got up and slammed the bolt lock down. There was another pause, then 3 loud, heavy hits shook the door. Neither of us moved. We were frozen, just completely horrified. But after those knocks, there wasn't anything else. No footsteps, and no voices or shadows. I seriously have no clue how long we waited. Eventually, Jackson unlocked and opened the door, finding no one and nothing out there. We stayed up through the entire night, both paranoid and feeling really uneasy. We tried to figure out who we thought it was, if it was the hunter from earlier. He did look creepy as hell, but this didn't feel like it was him. It felt like something else. I know that sounds crazy, but I don't know what else to think. When the sun came up, we booked it out of the cabin. The whole way back through the woods was just unsettling and eerie, like we were being watched. When we made it out, the first thing I did was check on Reddit with the OP who gave us the coordinates to ask if he had any weird encounters at the lookout tower. But the post was removed, and the account was deleted. Honestly, I think the guy had similar encounters and experiences, and likely that's why he left the ominous note of "Hope you're happy." Jackson and I are still great friends, and still actually explore abandoned places. We've had other encounters, but none like this one. Both of us are still genuinely freaked out about what happened during the 2 nights we visited that lookout tower, and have no idea what it was that we experienced there. I'm keeping my name anonymous for privacy reasons, but this happened just 5 years ago. At the time, I was traveling around with my dog Rocky. I know, not the most unique name, but I'd named him after the mountain range I found him stray in 3 years prior. He was a medium-sized Australian Shepherd mix, and the vets said he was between 6 to 7 years old when I found him. There was no information on him whatsoever, and after weeks of being unsuccessful in finding his owners, I made the decision to adopt him. He became sort of my adventure buddy, going on hikes and backpacking trips year-round, and we both loved it. The trip this happened on was honestly nothing crazy. It was just supposed to be a 1-day in, 1-day out backpack along a firebreak trail to a retired lookout tower. I really couldn't find too much info on the place, at least not up-to-date info. Best I could find were some really old rules about it being a non-rentable, first-come, first-serve public rest shelter with a 3-night limit. But like I said, that info was super outdated. I didn't care too much to do any more research than that, because I wasn't even planning to stay the night in the tower. The idea was to reach the ridge, take a look around, and hike another few miles down to a creek with a small tent campsite. However, this whole idea fell through, as when me and Rocky were about 30 minutes out from the tower, dark, heavy clouds started rolling overhead. We rushed to the tower, and with a view of the valley from the ledge, I could see a really bad rain and thunderstorm hitting the mountain directly across from us. It looked like it was headed our way. I didn't mind so much camping in my tent during a storm, but the problem was that I didn't know if we could make it to the campsite and set up before the storm hit. After a couple minutes of thinking, the decision was made for me by the sudden onset of rain downpouring on the lookout tower. So I decided to hunker down inside the tower with Rocky, at least to let the storm pass. It was then that I got a really good look at the place. It was mostly what I expected. White paint thinning on the walls, a rusted stove built into the corner, and aside from that, completely empty. Not even a trashy old mattress that most public forest shelters usually have. Within minutes, the storm hit twice as hard. Rain was coming down so heavy I couldn't even see the forest past the windows, and I could feel the wind cutting inside between the gaps in the wood. The tower had a bit of give to it as well, swaying a bit every time a gust of wind would hit it, and it didn't look like it was slowing down anytime soon. I laid out my sleeping bag to make a more comfortable rest area, then took out my dinner stuff and made a little freeze-dried meal. Rocky was pretty shaken by the storm though. He wouldn't settle, pacing near the door with his tail tucked and quietly whining. He never liked storms, but this one definitely made him feel worse than usual. Thought it was probably the movement of the tower, or maybe even the height. I called him over and had him sit next to me so I could pet him to quiet him down and get him to relax a little. But when it was just the sound of the rain drumming on the roof, I heard something else. It was a faint, hollow thunk sound, like something metal shifting beneath the floor. It was subtle enough to blend in with the rain, and only noticeable during short periods where the rain would slow down a bit. After a minute or two, though, I couldn't hear it anymore. Or maybe my mind drowned it out. I'm not really sure. Eventually, I laid down and Rocky burrowed in the sleeping bag with me. The rain and thunder started to feel comforting, I guess, and I fell asleep. Next thing I knew, I woke up and checked my watch, seeing it was just past 2 a.m. And right away, something was missing. The noise of rain and everything. It was just silent. I sat up, realizing Rocky wasn't in my sleeping bag anymore. He was over by the door, giving me that look like he needed to go out, and quietly whining again. I took a moment, then got up and put my shoes on and grabbed the flashlight. I opened the door and stepped outside with him, walking down the creaky steps and letting him roam the field between the tower and the forest. After the hours of heavy rain, the dead silence of the forest now was kind of unsettling. I stayed near the tower, just keeping my flashlight on Rocky as he did his business. But then I heard the slightest sound behind me. A thin metal squeak from a small wind gust. I turned around and pointed my flashlight under the lookout tower, immediately spotting what looked like a metal cellar door, like one of those underground ones that old houses sometimes have. I figured this one must have been for storage back when the tower was in use, maybe for keeping dry firewood and tools or something. But then I remembered the sounds I heard overnight, the metal thump sounds. And honestly, something in my gut knew the moment I saw those cellar doors that those sounds had to be from the cellar doors opening and closing, or maybe even something moving around inside the cellar. I kept the flashlight on it and approached it, then slowly lifted one of the doors and peeked inside. There were maybe 5 or 6 steps. It didn't go down very far, and on the stairs there were fresh, wet spots of mud going up every step. But after looking at it for just a moment, Rocky suddenly barked. It was just one sharp, terrified bark. I dropped the door closed and spun around, just quick enough to see something shift in the tree line just past Rocky. I immediately called him back, then ran up the stairs and inside the tower. Thankfully, I'd only unpacked my sleeping bag, so I quickly rolled it up and clicked it to my backpack. Someone was out there watching us, and I was not staying to find out why. I made Rocky stay close, and we quickly exited the tower and got back down to the base. I instinctively turned around and shined the flashlight back under the tower at the cellar. The doors were open. Then I looked down at Rocky. His eyes stared at the cellar intensely, clearly scared of whatever was in there. We hurried away, getting right back onto the firebreak trail. We pretty much ran for a whole mile before the rain started pouring down again, so we took it easy and eventually made it back. I called the Forest Service that morning, and it only made me more terrified of what could have happened. The ranger said that the lookout tower I mentioned was not in service and off limits to the public. I couldn't get him to spill any specifics, but from the little hints I felt like I got, it sounded like some things had been happening in that area that caused them to just stop allowing people to use the tower. That's why I couldn't find any information on it. I think there's a lot of possible explanations for what happened out there, but none of them make me feel any better. The most harmless explanation is someone was living in the cellar of the retired tower for who knows how long. But even then, why did they leave in the middle of the night? And why were they watching us from the trees? It's been a while, so I've mostly come to terms with not having any answers. But I think the chances are slim that if I hadn't have left, nothing else would have happened. This happened 3 decades ago. Obviously, I'm an older guy now, but when I was in my 20s, I used to do summer work with the Forest Ranger Service as a fire lookout. I did it for almost 9 summers in a row. It was paid work, so while I was in college and off for summer breaks, I loved it. Might have even done it for free. The job was simple and straightforward, essentially marking down a few data points once an hour, like temperature, wind, and humidity, and of course, scouting for fires. Aside from that, I was alone up there and could do really whatever I felt like. Often, I would walk the trails around the lookout station and just enjoy the scenery. Over the years, I became very capable in the woods, and aside from this one night, I never really had anything unsettling happen. The days would just go by sort of the same, and were always peaceful and relaxing. I don't remember most of the start of this day, because it was a very repetitive, normal day at the lookout station. Even a few hours past sunset, nothing really happened. I recorded my last data points for the night, and radioed in to the ranger station that I was done with my shift and clocking out for the day. The overnight ranger that was basically there every night was another young man, Brady. I'd only met him in person a handful of times, but I talked to him almost every night, as there wasn't all that much else to do. And whenever there were important things to radio in, he was the guy to receive my calls. After making some food and resting on the bed for a bit, I decided to get some air and head onto the balcony to look at the clear night sky. Took all but half a second to notice a bright, flickering light below the tower. It was just in the trees, not more than a quarter mile from me. There were way too many trees in the way to get a perfect view, but I knew it was a campfire of some sorts by the color and the way it was flickering. Now, at the time, there was a campfire ban due to dry weather, so this was actually a pretty big deal that needed to be sorted immediately. I radioed in to Brady, asking about permits and if he knew who could have been out there. But he said he had no clue, and that no permits were handed out to be camping there that night. I told him exactly where it was, and that it was strangely close to my lookout station. Brady told me since it was so close to just go let the campers know to put it out and to not even worry about making them leave or anything, even though they didn't have a permit to be in the area. So I took my radio and my flashlight and headed down the stairs, then began walking toward the campfire. Really, I never felt too worried heading out there. The walk was like 5 minutes, and I figured it would all go over easy. Again, I wasn't forcing them to leave. I was just there to tell them to put out the fire. After a short walk, I got to the campsite. But it really wasn't a campsite at all. It was just a fire, with no one around it. Worse yet, it was more of a bonfire, pretty much just some logs stacked up on the ground and lit on fire, almost like whoever it was using it to get my attention. I called out a few times, but got no responses. I remember starting to get creeped out, shining my flashlight around for a few minutes. The whole forest was quiet though, and it didn't seem like anyone was around. I radioed into Brady, telling him that nobody was around here, and that I thought it might have been some sort of prank to kind of lead me into the woods for no reason. But Brady didn't respond. I radioed again, but it was just static, which in my 9 years of doing this, I'd never not gotten a response. I knew this was not normal. A chill hit my body, and I kicked over the logs and buried the fire, then hurried back through the woods to the lookout station. I was shining the light around frantically, questioning why I even listened to him and went out there. When I made it back, I ran up the stairs, and right when I got to the top, my stomach tightened and my heart started racing. The whole place was ransacked. I had never felt so terrified and fearful in my entire life. I quickly used the main station radio to try contacting Brady again, but with no luck, I then radioed in to authorities that something really weird was going on. I didn't know what to say, but that someone was trespassing and messing with our stuff. I had to make the decision to either stay at the lookout or hike out of there. And even though it was dark, I chose to hike out. I felt like staying, knowing there was no way out if whoever was out there came back, was the more risky option. The hike was a well-defined trail 3 miles down to the ranger station, where Brady was stationed at, and then another mile to the road. I barely packed anything, and quickly left. The whole hour of hurrying through the woods was awful. It was so quiet that every step I made felt like it was giving me away. But I felt relief when I saw the dim lights outside of the ranger station. I called out Brady's name as I approached it, until I noticed the door was wide open. I walked inside, and Brady wasn't there. From the looks of it, he had walked outside for some reason, maybe to check on something he heard, then just vanished. I was out of there within seconds, running to the road and eventually meeting the cops there a few minutes later. They searched a huge perimeter over the next few days. Brady was never found. The whole fire thing was some sort of planned distraction, and I'm assuming they did something near Brady as well to get his attention and get him out of the cabin. Then again, I'm not sure. To be fully transparent, the state kept everything tightly under wraps because this happened in a fairly big touristy park in the state. Back then, I guess it was way easier to keep it all hush. You'd be surprised how often things would just go unheard, let alone when the state didn't want it to be known. That was the year I stopped going there during the summers, and as far as I know, nobody else ever worked at that tower after me. The listing didn't show up any years afterward. Even all these years later, though, I still constantly wonder what really happened that night, and how close I was to going missing just like Brady did. I'm 28, and this was 2 years ago. It was just a few days before Christmas, but I had taken the entire week off of work, or in-person work. At my job, we could essentially schedule when we'd actually come into the office, and I'd managed to have enough remote days racked up to be able to work from home this whole week. I knew there was supposed to be a big winter storm hitting the town around this week, and with the holiday and everything, I just wanted to stay home and have some more chill work days. Our company navigated remote work by basically just saying we had to get our work done by its deadline, and aside from that, it was up to us how we wanted to go about it. There were a few more rules and stuff, but this meant I could really work whatever schedule I wanted. I always preferred sleeping in and working late into the night. This day, I started work around noon. The first several hours were slow and calm, I guess. I sipped on my coffee and tried to get some work done. Over the course of those hours, the wind got increasingly heavier, slamming into the window next to me, and snow slowly began coming down. By 3 or 4, it was already dark outside, from the clouds overhead and all the snow flooding on top of the neighborhood. I was gonna go out to grab dinner, but with the roads being the way they were, I decided to stay in for the rest of the night. I worked at my desk for another couple hours. The sun had set and the winter storm had come in at full force. I left the window shades open so I could watch the snow fall from my desk, but out of nowhere, a light flickered outside. I looked over and saw a thin beam of light moving around. It was for sure a flashlight. I leaned back from my desk and looked at the window for maybe 10 seconds, watching the flashlight move around outside the window, before getting curious enough to get up and walk over to the window to see what was going on. I mean, it had to be freezing cold. Why was anyone out there? I peered outside the window, trying to look down the side of my house. I spotted the light, but before I could trace it back to whoever was shining it, it turned off. Or maybe went behind something. I couldn't tell. It was too dark, and the snow blocked pretty much my whole view. With nothing else to see, I sat back down. Honestly, I think I assumed some neighbor might have lost a pet out in the storm, or was just looking for something in general. I didn't worry much about it and tried to focus back on my work while the storm continued outside. Over the next 2-ish hours, the house constantly creaked and settled, but several times I thought I'd heard something slightly louder and more distinct, enough so for me to stop and look away from my desk, hoping to hear it again and figure out what it was. I didn't, but how could it not be the house just making noises? The thought that it was anything else seemed really far-fetched. That was until there was a much louder thud sound. It sounded more like something breaking than just a hit against the wall, let alone the house settling in the wind. And it sounded like it was inside the house. I got up from my desk and walked into the hallway, hearing nothing, and then moving downstairs. Everything looked and sounded normal, not that I could hear too much over the heavy winds, but there weren't any more loud thuds. Honestly, I wasn't scared enough to do a full-on search through every section of the house, not without any other noises or anything. So I started to head back up to my office, making it nearly to the top of the steps, when suddenly there was a click sound and the whole house went dark. The power cut out. I froze in place for a second. The entire house was pitch black. With the snowstorm outside, no light was even coming in through the windows. I couldn't even see my own hands in front of my face. I thought the storm had to have messed with the power, or maybe tripped the breaker. I began slowly moving back down the stairs, feeling for every step as I carefully and blindly made my way down to the lower hallway. The basement door, which led to the breaker box, was at the far end of this hallway, so I started following the wall, tracing my hand against it to keep myself going the right way, when I started to hear something. I stopped walking. It was something moving, sort of muffled, and from behind the basement door. It got closer and closer, until suddenly there was the quiet creak of the basement door opening. I could feel my eyes get wider as I stared down the darkness-filled hallway. I took one step back and quietly slipped through the open bathroom door that was right next to me. I still couldn't see, and I felt like closing the door would give me away, so I left it open. Slow, quiet footsteps began walking down the hallway. I was holding my breath, trying not to make a sound. The footsteps came closer and closer, until I felt they were just outside the bathroom I was in. Then the footsteps passed right by the open doorway. I never even saw them, walking just 2 or 3 feet from me. That's how incredibly dark it was. The footsteps continued to slowly move through the hallway until they reached the stairs, and from then on, it was carpet, so I couldn't hear anything at all. Suddenly, the sound of the snowstorm outside took over my hearing again, almost feeling amplified by the emptiness inside the home. The person could have stopped walking and still been standing right at the bottom of the stairs, but I took the chance that they most likely continued upstairs, and I decided to make a run for it. I left the bathroom and blindly moved to the other side of the home, sticking my hands out to try not to slam into a wall. I made it to the garage door, grabbed my keys, and left out the side door to get into my car in the driveway. I drove away and used the SOS device in my car to get in contact with the police. No surprise, the person was gone when they got there. From what the cops could find, after breaking in and turning off the power, whoever it was had essentially went straight upstairs and into the office, then to the bedroom, and nowhere else. Which meant this person was definitely there looking for me. What's really unsettling is the person most likely knew me, and knew the layout of my house enough to walk perfectly straight through it in the dark, and to go straight upstairs to my office, where they knew I'd be. Could have even been someone I talked to regularly, that I had no idea had horrible intentions. It made me question everything. I moved away, having paranoia about essentially every coworker or friend that I wasn't super close with. Since moving, I haven't had anything happen. Hopefully, I don't ever have any updates to give, but if something else happens, I'll let you know. I'd been driving since early morning, trying to make it from Minneapolis to my sister's place in Montana before the weekend. It was supposed to be a quick winter trip. Just me, my old but trusty Subaru, and some crappy gas station coffee. Everything was fine until the snow started falling once I got a little further north, and into the more isolated parts of the highway. It wasn't too bad to start, just some light snowfall here and there, but it ramped up pretty quick around the time the sun went down. It became almost a wall of white that even my headlights were having trouble cutting through. After an hour of this, the road was fully covered in snow, to the point where it was really hard to tell if I was even staying on the road. With how stressful it was, I told myself I'd pull off at whatever the next place was, so I could wait out the blizzard. Once I decided that, I think it was 15 minutes later, that I barely saw a light on the side of the road. It was snowing so hard I couldn't even read what it was before turning in. The parking lot was small, but had 3 cars in it. One noticeably buried in the snow, and the other 2 looked like they'd pulled in not long before me. I parked, and from there I could see from the shape and look of the building that it was some kind of roadside cafe. I was hoping for a motel, but figured if I was going to be stuck waiting here anyway, I might as well head in and grab some more coffee. I got out and walked through the blizzard. I hurried inside, nearly freezing already. This definitely wasn't the kind of place I was used to, or ever been to before, being a city person, so I felt very out of place. It was a very small, old-fashioned cafe with a bar near the front. 2 men were sitting there with coffee, and 1 woman working behind the counter. When I opened the door, though, it was very quiet inside. None of them were talking or anything. However, they all looked over at me and greeted me right away. Felt like I walked in during an awkward silence or something. I thought I was just overthinking it, though. I sat next to the men. Turned out both the guys had the same idea as me, pulling in to escape the blizzard. I ordered a coffee from the woman working there and took the mug over to a seat by the front window, watching the snow continue coming down outside and covering our cars. I also had a weird feeling about one of the men over at the bar. He was older, maybe 50, and the best way I could describe him is that he looked half dead. I don't know if it was from the weather or boredom, or if he was just having a bad day. Strangely, after I left and sat at the window, all the conversation stopped again, and the place was quiet, just like it had been when I first walked in. We all sort of sat there in silence for a few minutes, before suddenly one of the men got up and said something about trying to reach his nearby cabin before the roads get closed. Nobody else said anything. I watched him through the window, walking out to his car and getting in. He sat inside there for a minute, probably waiting for it to warm up. Then the other guy also got up, and without saying anything, left the cafe. I moved from the window back to the bar, immediately asking the worker what was up with those guys. She shrugged, saying they pulled in around the same time, and looked like they were arguing in the parking lot before coming inside. From there, they didn't say much of anything. Figured it was just road rage, or something like that. I stayed at the bar for a while, talking to her about the blizzard, and just a bunch of small talk. Over those 30 minutes, nobody else walked into the cafe. Eventually, I made my way back to the window to check on the snow and see if it had settled a bit. That's when I saw both of the men's cars still there. However, neither of them were inside the cars or outside the cars. They were just gone. This immediately sent a chill through me because it had been a while since they left the building. No way they were out in the blizzard for that long. I went over to the front door for a closer look, then decided to take a few steps out and look around. The sharp cold instantly hit my face, and the snow, while not as bad as before, still made it difficult to see. Aside from the harsh winds, it was quiet out there. No signs of either of the men. It actually gave me a really uneasy feeling, to the point where I wanted to leave. I dragged my legs through the snow to my car. Plan was to turn it on and let it warm up while I waited back inside before leaving. But it wouldn't start. Not like it was struggling to start, though. It wouldn't even turn on in the slightest, or make any sounds when I turned the key. It had only been maybe 40 minutes since I'd arrived at the cafe, and my car hadn't had a single issue before this night. My gut knew one of the men had something to do with this. I know maybe at this point that sounds crazy, like I was being over-skeptical from the jump, but I just knew it somehow. And then, as I sat in the seat, still trying to get it to turn on, I saw someone. One of the men walking out of the woods behind the cafe. He wasn't much more than a dark figure covered by the darkness and the blizzard of snowfall, but he was heading back toward the cars. I quickly got out and rushed inside, turning the lock on the front door. The woman asked me why I did that and what was going on, to which I quickly explained and told her to call 911. She seemed unsure, but did it anyway. A minute later, the man showed up at the door. He tried to walk in, pressing on the door. When he realized it was locked, he made eye contact with me through the glass and banged on the door. His eyes were bloodshot, and his face was pale, but he still had that half-dead look. Through our eye contact, and the door being locked, I think he knew that I was onto him, or whatever the hell it was that was going on. He didn't stay more than 10 seconds before running to his car. When the cops made it, only 3 cars were in the parking lot. Mine, the woman's, and the other man's. The creepy guy made it out. Unfortunately, this night didn't end on the typical he got away before anything happened. The officers followed some faint tracks in the snow into the woods behind the cafe, and found the body of the other guy. None of his things were missing though. It looked like it was just an act of violence. And just as disturbing, his car wouldn't start either. They found that it had the exact same issue that my car had, which was the ignition line being deliberately cut. So with all that info found out, the story pretty much told itself. When both men pulled in that night, at some point the creepy guy cut the line to prevent him from leaving. Then he just waited for him to head back outside, where he then followed him out, and of course, with the car not turning on and there being no escape, he was either dragged into the woods or had tried running away. Regardless, it all ended the same. And with the heavy winds from the blizzard, me and the woman inside had no clue any of it was going on, just 20 feet outside the front doors. But at some point during the 30 minutes before I noticed anything, the man had also cut the line on my car, which likely means he had the same plans for me that night. I was able to make it safely to my sister's place, but aside from a few phone calls to check in on me, I never heard anything about the man being found. Don't think I'll be going on any road trips around winter again though. And thinking about the image of that man walking out of the woods through the blizzard toward me, now knowing what he truly intended, still gets my heart racing. This was around Christmas time last year, I think between Christmas and New Year's. I was back in my hometown for winter break from college, but I still had bills and stuff, so when I wasn't busy with family, I did some door dashing. It was snowing this night, but not enough to pack the roads to the point it was dangerous to drive. But it was enough for most people to not want to leave their houses to get food, so nights like these were great for making decent money. Orders were going fine up until 10. Things slowed down, but I was still getting consistent orders. This one was just like any other, except maybe slightly further than usual, 20 minutes away. My hometown was small but spread out, so lots of places were scattered on the outskirts in the woods. However, when I pulled up to where I was supposed to deliver this order, I was a bit unsure about it. The directions had led me off the main road and onto a smaller forest road, eventually to a spot where it looked like there was supposed to be a gravel driveway, going deep into the trees. But it was completely snowed in. Nobody had plowed or shoveled it, and I couldn't even see any lights, like porch or outdoor lights, in the forest. I stayed in my car and called the customer, thinking there might have been something wrong with the address. He answered right away. The man sounded like he was mid-30s and a heavy smoker, with that deep, raspy voice. I said I was at the spot on the map he had marked to drop the order off at, but that I didn't see an open driveway, or house, or anything. The guy said it was probably covered in snow. The way he said it was like it should have been obvious. I responded, saying I think I see where the driveway is supposed to be, but that I wasn't comfortable driving my car through it. He then gave some snarky answer about this was why he ordered delivery, and if I wasn't going to deliver it, then what the hell was the point? I didn't totally agree with that, and it seemed like a really douchey response. But in the moment, I guess I just folded and said okay. I didn't want him to cancel the order or give me a negative review, especially not after I'd already driven all the way out here. Looking back, I've checked all the rules and stuff, and now I know that if I don't have access to the driveway or delivery location, then that's on the customer. At the time, I wasn't sure. So after he hung up, I got out with the order, locked my car, and started walking through the snow. It wasn't super deep, but with it being on a less maintained forest driveway, I think my car would have had a lot of trouble and probably gotten stuck. And it was really hard to tell where the actual path was. I mostly just tried to follow what I thought was a clearing in the trees, but with no lights around to guide me, I didn't really know where I was walking. I kept looking back behind me at my car, seeing it get further and further away. It was my only sense of distance I had, because up ahead it was really dark, and I couldn't tell where I was going. It all just looked like the same forest. And all of a sudden, there was a sound to my left. A crunch that sounded eerily similar to a boot stepping in the snow. But it was far, like just barely in reach of my hearing. I looked out there, and even tried turning my phone light on, but it did absolutely nothing. I didn't see anything, and didn't hear anything else, so I kept walking. The cold started getting to me, and the endless darkness ahead had me rethinking everything. I figured by this point I would have seen the house, or something at least to tell me I was going the right way. I stopped in place and stood there for a second, just having a moment of realization that this was all really odd. I looked around, and I know it sounds stupid, but it took until then for me to think that there might actually not be a house here. Like this was all just some sort of weird trick to get me out here, which was absolutely terrifying to think about, standing there alone in the snowy, dark forest. I took my phone out and decided if the customer didn't answer, or tried again to convince me to keep walking, then I'd leave and cancel the order. I pressed call and held the phone up to my ear as I listened to it ring. It rang twice before I saw something in the corner of my eye. I turned my head, seeing a light far out in the trees. Then it suddenly shut off, and a half-second later, the call dropped. I didn't even bother waiting or trying to think anything through. I immediately started sprinting back the way I came. The crunching snow beneath me covered whatever sounds could have been coming from behind me, like if the guy was chasing me or not. Probably made it even more terrifying, not knowing what was behind me. I ran all the way to my car, and before I even made it up to the door, I saw something was wrong. It was leaning on one side, which led my eyes to one of the tires being flattened. He had slashed it. I got in and started it anyway, driving out of there. I called the police on my way out, but aside from some questioning, they were kind of useless, and really didn't seem to take the whole thing that seriously. To me, I think it's pretty clear that the guy was leading me out into the woods for a reason, and even went as far as to slash the tires on my car to either keep me there or keep me from leaving. I don't know what I would have found had I kept walking into those woods, or what would have happened. It was snowing on this Halloween. Me and my friend group were all planning to have a big night of trick-or-treating, but with the snow coming down pretty heavily, a lot of their parents wouldn't let them out for too long. To be fair, it usually wasn't this bad in October around here, but for the last week, our city was in the middle of an early snowstorm. Anyway, it ended up being just me and my friends John and Hayden. They were still able and willing to go trick-or-treating. We all put on some heavy snow gear, boots, jackets, hats, all that stuff. Pretty much the only parts of our costumes you could see were the masks we were wearing. We started trick-or-treating. For the first couple hours, there were a decent amount of kids running around doing the same as us. But once the sun got lower, it was basically just us three, walking around in the snow. We continued going door to door, eventually getting up to one of the houses on the corner of the block. There was nothing unusual about it. We went up, knocked on the door, and got candy from the older woman that lived there. But it was when we turned to leave the porch that we walked past a man on the driveway. He had a thick jacket on, and a really creepy mask. More creepy than the typical ones you see, as this one looked kind of realistic, even having long black hair attached to it, draping over his shoulders. Hayden said he recognized the mask as Momo, which if you were around on the internet about a decade ago, you've probably heard of it. It's unsettling to say the least, but definitely not something most younger kids would be comfortable with seeing, even on Halloween. We all noticed him and felt really weird about it. The man wasn't walking up or down the driveway. He was just standing there in the snow, watching us. We continued down the sidewalk, turning back a few times to look at him, but the blizzard quickly covered up our view of him. I think another thing that made us feel a little uneasy about it was that it was clearly a man, not a kid. He was tall and completely alone out there. So what was he doing? John convinced us to skip a few houses, just to be safe. I don't think any of us wanted to run into that guy again. We crossed over to the next street and got back to going door to door. Have to say, the whiteout from the snow keeping us from seeing anything more than a house or two down the road made things a lot more uncomfortable. We had no idea if the man was still out there. I think 30 minutes passed. The sun was fully down, and even the streetlights were barely beaming through the falling snow. It was around then that John said he had to go back home, since his parents told him to be back by sundown, if it was still snowing. Hayden and I walked with him back to his house, then decided on what to do with just the two of us. I know it hadn't really been that long, but by this point, neither of us were thinking about that creepy man anymore. He hadn't actually done anything, and we never saw him following us, so we had no reason to keep thinking about it. Me and Hayden went to a few more doors and got some more candy, before we both were getting really cold and found ourselves just not enjoying it too much. So Hayden split ways and went back home, leaving me to head back to my house alone. It was about a 15-minute walk away, but in the snow, probably longer. Almost immediately, once it was just me out there, it hardly felt like Halloween. Snow covering every inch of the neighborhood, and nobody else walking around. Literally just me. Once I realized that, I started getting a little paranoid, looking all around and hoping to see another group of trick-or-treaters. But instead, I saw something else. On the other side of the street from the sidewalk I was on, there was a forest, and through the trees, someone was watching me. At first, I just saw his figure, standing far back, and mostly covered by the darkness and the falling snow. But as I continued walking and looking across the street, the figure moved with me, matching my pace and staying in view of me. I started to walk faster, eventually getting to a turn where I could go deeper into the neighborhood, where there were more houses and no forests. But the figure followed. He walked out of the tree line, and when he passed under a streetlight, I saw that same disturbing mask with the long black hair. He must have followed us the entire time, waiting for one of us to be alone. I hurried, moving as fast as I could. The empty and quiet streets made it feel like I was running for my life in an abandoned neighborhood. When I made it home, I locked the door behind me, but for some reason didn't tell my parents what was happening. I just went straight to my room. I guess I was scared to admit that I thought someone was actually following me, as if not admitting it would somehow make it not true. For a few minutes, I just sat on my bed and caught my breath, until the doorbell rang. I immediately felt a chill run through me, knowing that I saw no one else outside while I was running back home. I heard my parents talking, confused that any kids were still out trick-or-treating. My mom went and grabbed some of the candy that they'd already put away. Then she answered the door. As she did, I quietly walked around to the hallway and looked down at who was at the door. My stomach dropped. It was the tall man in the mask, and although I couldn't see his eyes, I know he saw me at the back of the hallway. He didn't even take any candy or say anything to my mom. He just walked away. Likely, the man was hoping I would be alone. My mom found it really creepy and strange, knowing as well that it was an adult, but she assumed it was just a dumb Halloween prank. I never told her what really happened, or what that man was really trying to do that night. My name is Jake, and at the time this happened, I was 29. It was the middle of autumn, and I had drove up to a rental cabin to stay at for a few days. It was a really nice but small cabin in the middle of the woods with a lake behind it. I'd been there a few times already, so it felt almost like a second home to me, somewhere to go when I wanted a short break from everyday life. The first day I got there, I unpacked and spent the whole afternoon settling in, then went out to the lake to watch the sunset. While out there, I noticed someone walking near the lake. Looked like they were walking the perimeter, not doing anything suspicious, so I didn't even think much about it. It was just something I noted. After the sun set, it got way too dark to be staying outside, so I headed back in. There wasn't actually too much to do inside the cabin, other than relax, so it sounds really boring, but I basically just sat on the sofa and chilled there, thinking to myself until I felt ready to go to bed. I turned off all the lights, double-checked the doors were locked, then went to the bedroom, and was on the verge of falling asleep when a sudden voice called out. "Hello? Anyone inside? Hello?" Someone was calling out for me outside of the cabin, asking if anyone was inside and knocking on the back door. I was so confused and weirded out, I opted to not say anything. Seemed to work, because after just a few minutes, the man walked away. I waited a while, then got up to look around. Couldn't see anything out there. I'm not sure how the guy was even walking around. Definitely creeped me out, but I closed all the curtains, then went back to bed. The rest of that night went smoothly. I woke up in the morning and had some coffee, and really did all the same that day. A couple times I thought about the unknown man that came by in the middle of the night, but with no other information, there wasn't all that much to think about. It was strange, but that was it. I stayed outside later this night, though, having prepared a campfire so I could actually see. An hour or so into sitting out there, I heard some movement in the trees behind me. I turned and looked, but could barely see at all. I figured it was nothing, so I didn't pay it much attention. That was until it happened again. I looked back, but it was quiet. A strange, almost ominous feeling fell over me as I looked out there. I quickly smothered the fire and went back inside, taking one last look over at the woods before closing and locking the door. I could feel that something odd was going on, and I guess I was right, because not 10 minutes later, someone knocked on the back door again. He also called out, asking if I was inside. The man's voice was the same one that I heard last night. I was standing in the hallway, completely stunned. Eventually, after the man continued to knock and call out, I decided to slowly peer around the corner and look at the door. The man's eyes were already staring right at me. He looked disheveled and honestly horrified. That crazy look that insane people have. "Open the door. Please, let me in." I quickly went back behind the wall. The man was aggressive, trying to pressure me into letting him in. I could hear some amount of anger in his voice. I hurried to the bedroom and called 911. Disturbingly, the man must have somehow known, because soon after, he started banging on the bedroom window. He eventually got so aggressive, he cracked the window. But after that, it went quiet. I didn't hear him anymore, and police made it a few minutes later. The man was gone when the officer searched around the cabin, but eerily, blood was on the window along the cracked glass. The man must have been punching the window with his bare fist so hard that he bled, which made the whole thing even more scary as to how insane he was. I never went back to the cabin after that incident. No other information was found as to who the man was, or what he was attempting that night. Where I live, around Halloween, it always gets pretty cold. Sometimes it snows, sometimes it doesn't. But regardless, that's just how it's always been. This year, on Halloween, it had snowed pretty heavily overnight, and by the time trick-or-treat hours had started, it began snowing again. There weren't too many crowds out because of it. I was just chilling inside at home, handing out candy whenever someone did come by, and watching TV by the fireplace to pass the time. All the kids that came by had heavy jackets or coats covering their whole costumes, so the whole Halloween spirit wasn't really hitting too hard this year. As the night went on, the snow started coming down even harder, which sent pretty much all the kids home that were already stubborn enough to still go out in the cold before. 30 minutes went by, with no kids coming to the door. It was around 7 o'clock, and the sun had already set, so I assumed that the trick-or-treating was done for the night. I got up from the living room and started walking over to the door, but immediately was taken aback. The front door was open, swaying in the cold wind that was blowing into the house. I walked over and looked out, not seeing anyone, then closed it. I stood there and thought about it for a second, figuring I probably just didn't fully close it earlier, whenever the last kids came by, and the wind must have pushed it further open. I mean, I knew I didn't lock it, because it was Halloween, and I was constantly opening it anyway. I let it off as nothing to worry about, and went back to the couch. I did open up the curtains by the window, on my way back, just to watch the snow fall. Another few hours went by, as the night got colder and the snow came down even harsher. I had to check the weather a few times to make sure there wasn't some kind of massive blizzard hitting our town. I think it was around 10 that I started to feel tired enough to go to bed, so I turned everything off and went to the kitchen to finish doing some dishes from dinner that I hadn't cleaned up yet. It was just something I did as part of my nightly routine, cleaning up the place before going to sleep. As I was down there putting things away though, I heard what sounded like a creaking noise above me. I literally stopped what I was doing and stared at the blank ceiling, listening to the sound until it quietly faded out. I was kind of in awe for a moment. It sounded just like a door opening, which ironically in the moment I thought sounded way too much like a horror movie to actually be what it was. I finished up downstairs, turned all the lights off, then headed upstairs to go to bed and check on whatever that sound was that I heard. Honestly, I didn't expect to find anything at all, and didn't really care that much. But when I got to my bedroom, I immediately noticed the closet was open. This changed everything for me, instantly making me unsettled. I put everything together between the front door being randomly found open, and then this door also suddenly opening. This couldn't be a coincidence. For good measure, I looked into the closet and didn't see anything. I kinda was hoping there would be something obvious to tell me that something was definitely off. I even checked around the room. I just couldn't see how if someone had snuck inside, why weren't there any other signs of them? Like, where the hell were they? And what was the point of sneaking in, if just to open a few doors? I was still feeling really uneasy, so I shut the bedroom door and locked it while I paced the room and thought about everything. And at some point, when I happened to be facing the door, I saw something. A shadow right under the door. It only took a few seconds to be almost sure that someone was standing right behind it. I tried not to move or make any sounds, even though, looking back, whoever was behind that door obviously knew I was already in there. I guess I just didn't want them to know that I knew. I must have stood there frozen, staring at the shadow under the door for an entire 2 or 3 minutes. I wanted to call the police, but didn't want them to hear me, which left me just unsure what to do. I think it was actually because I didn't move or make any noise for so long though, that whoever was behind there must have realized something was wrong and that I was probably onto them. Because the doorknob slowly turned a few times, clicking against the lock. Then the shadow moved away from the door. Maybe they recognized I could see the shadow under the door. I don't know. But after that, I waited for probably 10 minutes straight. I didn't hear anything else, or see anything. I had no idea if the person was even still behind the door, let alone in my house. Eventually, I had to call the police, but still tried to be quiet. It seemed like the intruder had left though, because cops walked in and didn't find anyone else in the house. The whole thing is really just a terrifying mess. I can't even imagine what would have happened if I didn't close and lock the door when I did. Even a few minutes later would have changed everything about that night. Obviously, because I never saw the intruder, I had no info to give the police aside from some possible suspects, like crazy exes or whatever, which I didn't really have. There's no saying who it was or what they were going to do. This was 3 years ago on Halloween. Now, in the few days leading up to October 31st, I had a few strange instances while I was at home. I thought at the time it was just some annoying kids ding-dong ditching my house, but after everything that happened, I'm not so sure. A couple times a day, my doorbell would randomly ring, and every time I'd open it, nobody was there. This happened for several days, until Halloween. I made sure to have the day off of work and handed out candy for most of the afternoon. By 8, nobody else was walking around, so I closed and locked up the house, then went upstairs to my bedroom to watch TV in bed for the rest of the night. I was binging one of my shows, and 2 hours went by like nothing before the doorbell rang downstairs. I assumed it was a late trick-or-treater, but I ignored it because they should know that it was way too late by now. I didn't even pause my show. Several minutes passed, so I figured whoever it was had left. But then the doorbell rang again. Now it was a little strange. Were they just standing outside my door for that whole time, waiting? I felt like now I had to get up and check. I paused the TV and went downstairs, looking out the peephole to see who was on my porch. Nobody was there. That's when I made the connection between this and all the other similar occurrences that happened over the last few days. However, they'd never done it this late though. Something about this time felt different. It gave me chills the longer I looked out at my front porch. I stayed downstairs for a half hour, not feeling safe enough to go back up to my room. Even though I was nervous, I held on to the fact that it very likely could be the same ding-dong ditching that was going on before, which was super frustrating, but ultimately harmless. While I was downstairs, I never heard anyone else outside, or got any signs that anyone was still around. My gut felt like I wasn't totally in the clear, but everything else said otherwise. So I went back upstairs. I left the door to my room open, just in case if anything was going on, I'd hopefully be able to hear it. I continued watching my show for another hour, and after finding myself getting sleepy, I turned it off, got ready for bed, and fell asleep. As it's probably no surprise, I woke up in the middle of the night to the doorbell ringing. I jolted up and stared at the open bedroom door, the sound of the doorbell still echoing through the halls. But something wasn't right about it. It was a different sounding ring. I got out of the bed and walked into the hallway, no idea what the hell was going on. The whole house was dark, but right at the top of the stairs, in the middle of the hall, there was something on the ground. I felt my face go pale because I knew nothing was there before. I walked up to it, and as I got closer, it made that same doorbell sound that had woken me up. It was some kind of recording playback device, just one of those small cheap handheld ones. But more horrifying was thinking about how the hell did it get here. Someone had to be inside my home. This had to be some sort of trap though, knowing the sound would lure me out into the hallway. It was as I came to that realization that I heard a few thumps behind me. I turned around. No one was there, but one of the doors in the hallway was now open. I instantly took off running down the stairs. I went straight to the front door, swinging it open and almost slamming into a person standing right at the front door. He had on an all-black cloaked costume, with a pale black and white mask over his face. I quickly backed up and slammed the door shut, but heard footsteps sprinting down the stairs I just came from. I ran for the back door, as the front door swung back open and 2 sets of footsteps came up behind me. I made it out and jumped my fence, then made a dead sprint for the trees. The men didn't seem to be able to follow me. I was able to get help and have the police come over, which of course by then it was kind of pointless. Most likely, this whole thing was some sort of scheme. By ringing the doorbell over and over for a whole week, I was less alarmed when I heard it that night, so I didn't call the police right away. And after breaking in, the men probably just wanted to mess with me by setting up the recorder and everything, just to scare me into running into the man waiting for me at the front door. Basically just 2 unhinged men having fun mentally torturing me, before probably kidnapping me, or maybe even worse. I moved away when I could, and nothing has happened at all since that night. I was on a spontaneous camping trip in the middle of fall. Sort of made the impulse decision to go for one last trip up to the northern woods of Minnesota before winter rolled in and put everything on hold for several months. I'd been up to these woods many times before, living just a couple hours south, so it was my regular place to go when I wanted to camp or spend a weekend hiking. The spot I was at was a small, secluded lake. The thing about Minnesota that I really loved is that it's known for having thousands of lakes scattered around the northern portion of the state, which means you can pretty often find smaller lakes that have nobody else around. Having one all to myself was always great, and so when I found this spot a few years ago, it sort of became my go-to camping area. The first 3 days of this trip were completely unnoteworthy. Nothing happened. I just camped and enjoyed having an empty lake to myself, spending the days wandering the woods, swimming in the water, and relaxing to the peace and quiet. I felt very safe and saw nothing to make me feel otherwise. It was on the 4th day, though, that I woke up at sunrise and exited my tent to find scattered footprints all over my campsite. Not just in the area around it, but some going right up to the front of my tent. They weren't there before, and it wasn't from me. The prints were from heavy boots, which I didn't even have, and they clearly came by while I was sleeping. I instantly felt really uncomfortable, knowing I had some sort of visitor in the middle of the night. I spent that whole morning walking the area, both through the forest and around the lake, looking for any other signs of anyone around. I didn't find anything. It wasn't really the fact that someone else arrived here that I was so concerned about. It was that they arrived in the middle of the night and walked all around the area I'd clearly been set up at, even coming right up to my tent, which was just insanely creepy. Then they just left without any traces, not even camping around here. It just didn't add up. I kept my eyes open for the rest of the day. Leaving did cross my mind, but the last thing I wanted to do was cut my final camping trip of the year short, and I saw no signs of whoever it was still being around. Looked like he really did just show up and then leave. Maybe he was hoping the spot would be empty and didn't want to share the lake with anyone else. Anyway, the day went by pretty slowly. I hung around the campsite, not doing too much. When the sun set, I stayed by the campfire and waited for myself to get tired. I'd mostly calmed down about the situation. I still thought it was weird and almost unexplainable, but continuing to think about it would only make me more unsettled, and I would never get any answers anyway. The night was pretty quiet. The water moving in the lake, the campfire, and the wind made it hard not to feel relaxed. I settled in my chair and slumped back, cozied up inside my winter jacket. My eyes were starting to get heavy, but I didn't want to get up, so I just let myself fall half asleep in the chair. I say half asleep because I don't think I ever actually fell asleep fully. My eyes were closed and everything, but I still think I was mostly conscious. And then I heard it. A voice call out my name. My eyes shot open, and I sat frozen for a moment. I whipped my head around in all directions. The forest was quiet, and everything seemed to be just as it was before. My eyes were still wide open, and my heart was racing. I couldn't tell if it was just a quick dream or something, or if I'd actually heard someone call my name out. It seemed so ridiculous and impossible that there was no way. But it felt so real. After a minute, I called out hello, and listened to my voice echo through the woods, with no response. I guess it really was just a quick dream, or maybe even one of those sleep paralysis type hallucinations, because of the half-asleep state I was in. That's how I tried to reassure myself. My heart immediately racing like that got me wide awake though, and that feeling of unsettledness still lingered. I couldn't get rid of it. I must have sat there for another half hour until I felt my eyes getting a bit heavy again. But this time, before I even closed them, or was even near falling asleep, I heard it again. A voice calling out my name from the darkness of the woods. The voice I didn't recognize, but the way he said my name was like he was asking for my help, or wanting me to come out there. I stood up and stared out at the woods. His voice called out my name again. It sounded like he wasn't that far away. Obviously, my head was spinning. How did this random guy in the woods know my name? And what was he doing out there in the dark? I took a few steps toward the trees and out to the edge of the light, then reluctantly called out hello again. There was a quiet pause for 15 seconds before the response I got was just the guy calling out my name for a fourth time. Something felt really wrong here. The way he was trying to lure me into walking out there into the woods, where it was legitimately pitch black. No way I was following his voice, no matter how curious and tempted I was to get answers. I took a few steps back and started to pack my things. I wasn't packing all that fast though, because I was constantly stopping to listen and check my surroundings. Not to mention the campfire was just glowing ashes at this point, so taking everything down in the dark wasn't all that easy. It felt like I was running out of time though. The voice kept getting closer as the light from the campfire faded, and several times footsteps would crunch on the leaves not too far away. Whoever was out there had to know what they were doing, which was horrifying. When I finally had everything packed, I threw on my backpack and took out the flashlight. I debated whether or not to turn it on, but decided it might be best to leave it off and try to disappear in the woods, letting the darkness give me enough cover to get away from him and ensure he couldn't follow me. So I left it off and quickly hurried in the opposite direction of the voice. The man called out again as I was leaving, and I only turned back once I was further away. I could barely see the warm glow of the embers from the campfire, and standing just behind it was the faintest outline of a figure. Couldn't make out anything distinct, although something about him looked extremely uncanny, or just off in some way. I turned around and hurried deeper into the woods, hearing the man's voice call out my name one more time, before it was suddenly just me in the empty, quiet, and dark woods again. The hike out of there was nerve-wracking to say the least, but the relief of making it out and getting back to my car and away from those woods, I can't even describe. I thought about calling the cops, but honestly thought I'd sound crazy. Some guy calling out my name in the woods and I guess stalking me. Like, what would cops even do about that? So now, almost 3 years later, I still don't know what truly happened out there that night. I know it's insane, but a part of me is upset that I didn't walk closer toward the voice to try and find out who it was, or how they knew my name. I know if I had though, it could have been the last decision I'd ever make. I prefer to remain anonymous, but this happened several years ago. I worked at a small standalone business, and one of my coworkers was a guy named Cameron. We connected right away, both having been hired around the same time, and our desks were right next to each other. So needless to say, we talked a lot and had a great work friendship. We never hung out outside of work, but we always joked about going on a camping trip together, since we were both into hiking and stuff, and often found ourselves talking about it during the workday. I never thought it was really gonna happen though, until one day I went into work and his desk was cleared out, and Cameron wasn't there. Turned out he'd been fired, for reasons I of course wasn't permitted to know. I got a text from him that same day, asking about meeting up outside of work and going on that camping trip we always talked about. Honestly, I felt bad for him. and knowing now that I'd likely never see him again if I didn't, I took him up on the offer. I mean, how bad could it be? We made the plans, and a week later, we met up at a forest trailhead 2 hours west of the city. He looked very excited and happy to see me, and I was actually happy to see him as well. Right off the bat, though, I did feel like he wasn't the same person as he was in the office. Not in a concerning way, but it was just something I noticed. We started heading down the trail and talked the whole way there. I tried subtly asking about why he didn't work at the office anymore, but he avoided the question. At work, he was always very open about everything, probably too open, so it was kind of strange to see him more reserved like this. But I assumed he just made an embarrassing mistake or something. Anyway, we got to the campsite and set up both tents, then made lunch. And as soon as we were done eating, Cameron abruptly stood up and said, "Be right back," then walked off into the woods. The way he said it was like he had somewhere to be, which in this setting didn't make any sense. Like, why not just say you were heading out for a walk or whatever? I stayed at the campsite, relaxing for 10 minutes until he came back. He didn't say anything and acted like nothing happened, so I just let it go over my head. We talked for a bit longer. I don't know, an hour I guess. Then he did the same thing. He said he'd be back and walked out into the woods, except this time it was right in the middle of a conversation. He suddenly just looked out at the trees, stopped talking, and left. First thing I did was look where he had looked, but didn't see anything. This time I actually felt really weird about it, unsettled almost. Again, 10 minutes later, he came back. This time I asked where he went, and he thought for a second, but just said nowhere. No explanation whatsoever. And again, I just let it go. I'd been talking to Cameron nearly every day for 6 months straight, so a few strange things weren't going to fully change my view of him. We talked some more around the campfire, and eventually went into our tents to go to bed. I was pretty tired, so I fell asleep no problem. However, I woke up in the middle of the night. My eyes opened, and I distinctly remember how quiet it was. Just the soft forest sounds. I unzipped my tent and looked out, just to check the surroundings, still not knowing why I woke up. Right away, I saw Cameron's tent was open, and he wasn't in it. I looked all around the campsite and didn't see him anywhere. I noticed the flashlight was missing though, but I didn't see a light anywhere in the trees. "Cameron?" I called out his name a few times, but he didn't call back. I sat outside my tent for a whole minute, looking all around and waiting to see if he came back, until I started to hear something out in the trees. It sounded like chatter, two people talking quietly back and forth. "Cameron? You out there?" The talking stopped, and the forest was quiet again. After 30 seconds of tension, Cameron slowly walked out of the trees and into the campsite. His face was tense, but he tried to hide it with a nervous smile. I asked him who was out there. He paused, then said no one. As he was talking, though, a few footsteps came from out in the trees. I know he heard it too. I looked at him again, and again asked who was out there. I was starting to get really uneasy. But even still, he said no one. There was a very tense 15 or 20 seconds where both of us just looked at each other. And quietly, slow footsteps were approaching from the dark. Adrenaline built up in me until I suddenly just bolted down the trail, leaving everything behind. As I ran, I could hear Cameron and some other guy talking, but I never looked back. I didn't stop until I was at my car. Thank God we drove separately, and I kept my keys and phone on me. I drove home and spent the rest of that night just thinking about what the hell went wrong. I ended up texting Cameron, but the message didn't even deliver. He'd already blocked me. Since that night, I'd never had any contact with him. I don't know who else was out there, or what him and Cameron were planning, but I think I'm really lucky to have gotten away. Last year, just around early November, I took a trip out to my hometown, mostly to see some old friends, but also to enjoy the week in a nice vacation cabin. Just a nice rental place in the woods. My hometown wasn't big and mostly surrounded by forest, with plenty of great views and camping areas nearby. I had actually never been camping before, but I'd been doing tons of research and really wanted to get into it. I'd collected all the gear I needed and figured a great first time camping would be in a forest I was familiar with, right outside of my hometown. That way I felt safer and could ease into the hobby. I chose the rental cabin specifically because there was a trail behind it that led to a small campground. I thought if anything went wrong, I could just head back to the cabin and everything would be alright. Felt like a risk-free way to enjoy my first trip. I spent the first couple days hanging out with my friends, and an additional day just chilling at the cabin and prepping my gear. Then I finally headed out to the campground. The trail was only an hour long. For the first 10 minutes, I was more focused on getting my backpack adjusted the right way, and making sure everything was just going as planned. Once I got it all situated, and had nothing else to worry about, I started to get a strange feeling. The feeling of being watched from out in the trees. It was my first time being alone in a forest, so I thought I was just nervous, but the feeling really didn't go away like I thought it would. Every time I'd look out at the woods past the trail, this hollow, awful feeling would come over me. It really did feel like a sign to get the hell out of there. But I didn't listen. I kept going, fighting those feelings all the way up to the campsite. The campsite wasn't much, just a small bit of land that I honestly wouldn't have thought was even a campsite, if not for a few scraps left around by previous campers. This place definitely wasn't very established, because it was unkempt and not maintained at all. Still, being off the trail and in a more open area made me feel a bit better. I felt okay about it enough to stay. I started unpacking and getting my tent set up. This was my first time, so I was following the step-by-step instructions and making sure I got it right. Took maybe 15 minutes, which I don't think was too bad. It was as I was putting the final rain cover over it that a man arrived at the campsite. He was tall and looked around my age, so mid-20s. When I looked over at him, he waved and gave a strange smile. Strange because he made a regular smile, except the rest of his face didn't move. Like he just smiled with his mouth and teeth, while having a blank face. I thought it was really weird, and some crazy coincidence that he showed up right after I did, to a campsite that didn't seem to be used very often. But what did I know? I continued to mind my own business and get everything all sorted in my area, taking everything out and gathering sticks to build a fire with. There was already a small fire ring that someone must have built forever ago. As I was doing all that, the man set up his own tent, not too far from me. But oddly, that was it. That was all he brought. I saw him walk up with a backpack, which I thought was an actual backpack, but it was just a sling bag that had the tent in it. He didn't even have a sleeping bag, or food, or anything at all. I know that for a fact, because his tent was mostly a mesh see-through, not even having a rain cover over it. And the man was just sitting there, doing nothing. I felt weird every time I happened to glance over, because he would immediately look at me, and I'd have to quickly look away. After gathering all the sticks and finally having a while to just sit there and do nothing, I couldn't help but get more and more creeped out by this guy. Just a gut feeling that something was really off about him, and with the sun starting to go down, the thought of being there alone with him at night was really starting to bother me. As much as I hated myself for it, I decided it wasn't worth staying here while I felt this way, especially with my rental cabin not too far. Might even be able to make it before the sun was fully down. I started packing, and the man immediately got out of his tent. He stood next to it, and while he tried to not make it obvious, it was very obvious that he was watching me. His smile was gone now, and his whole face was straight and almost annoyed. I didn't even bother organizing my backpack, throwing everything in and just hoping it would zip up. When I was finally ready to leave, sunlight was just poking out from the top of the trees, so I knew I had to hurry. But the man hadn't taken down his tent, so I hoped that meant he was staying. I started walking. I kept checking behind me, making sure he didn't follow. For the first few minutes, I was relieved to see an empty trail every time I looked back. But about 10 minutes in, I turned around again and saw him. The trail wasn't perfectly straight, but far back, I saw him through the trees, coming down the trail toward me. I felt myself go numb. I was horrified. I picked up the pace, moving faster down the trail. From what I could see, I don't think he knew that I saw him, and the sun going down actually made things better for me. I was able to get back to the rental cabin, throwing my bag down inside and locking every door. I then posted up at the back window for 15 minutes, staring at the woods as the sun fully set and it became dark and lifeless. And it was as I was still staring out the window that a sudden knock shook the front door behind me. Not just some casual knock though. Over and over, he was banging his fist against the door. In a panic, I called the police. I genuinely couldn't tell if he was just knocking really hard or actually trying to break the door down, and I was too scared to even look. As soon as I started talking on the phone, the man stopped for a second. I knew he was listening. Then his footsteps ran around the cabin, and I'm pretty sure I heard a few thumps from him trying to open up one of the windows, before his footsteps fled into the woods. After that, it stayed quiet until 2 officers arrived 20 minutes later. With everything I told them, the officers agreed the man seemed to have some really bad intentions. However, finding him wasn't so easy. I knew what he looked like, but that was about it. They did a quick search that night with flashlights, but they never found him. His tent was gone from the campsite as well. I truly don't know what could have happened that night. I still can't forgive myself for not listening to my gut right away. It would have prevented everything that happened that night. I should have listened to my gut the moment I started feeling off about that forest.
Thanksgiving used to be my favorite holiday, but after my husband's death 3 years ago, it became the loneliest day of the year. Our daughter lived in California, too far to visit every year. So that Thanksgiving night, I sat alone at my dining table, picking at a turkey I cooked purely out of habit. Around 8 o'clock, someone knocked at my front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I live in this farmhouse 5 miles outside of town, down a dirt road nobody uses unless they are lost. I thought maybe it was a friend checking on me, so I wiped my hands on my apron and went to the door. As I opened it, I was surprised to see a boy about 16 years old standing on my porch, trembling in the cold. He was wearing torn jeans and a filthy shirt that hung off his thin frame. His bare feet were caked in mud. But above all these things, I noticed his eyes. Something about his stare didn't seem normal. He asked if I had any food, said he hadn't eaten in days. His voice was flat, but the way he stood with his shoulders slumped and his hands hanging limp at his sides made me believe him. I welcomed him in. He followed me to the dining room without a word. moving with a strange shuffling gait. I pulled out a chair for him and filled the plate with turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, and cranberry sauce. He sat down and stared at the plate for a long time before picking up the fork. But instead of devouring it like a starving kid should, he lazily pushed the food around. He lifted bites halfway to his mouth, then he'd set them back down. I asked him if he didn't like it, or preferred I make him something else. He said the food was so overcooked that it had ruined the meat. For the rest of the meal, he just sat there staring at me, flashing a creepy grin. I started to feel uncomfortable and regretted letting him in. Sorry, but I can't let you stay here any longer. You'll get motels down the road. He stood up slowly, still staring at me with those unblinking eyes. I got up too and backed toward the door. All of a sudden, I was really aware of how quiet the house was and how far the nearest neighbors lived. After what felt like forever, he turned and walked out without uttering a single word. I locked the door immediately, checked all the windows, and promised myself I'd never be so stupid to let a stranger in again, no matter how pitiful they looked. I went to bed, but couldn't shake the image of the boy and his weird demeanor. Around 2 a.m, I woke to screaming of my chickens. Sometimes coyotes sneak into the barn, and I thought it was exactly that. So, I grabbed the flashlight and exited the house. As I stepped onto the porch, I noticed the white and brown feathers scattered across the grass, leading a trail toward the barn. It made no sense for the feathers to be there. With my heart pounding in my chest, I followed the trail. The barn door was wide open, hanging crooked on its hinges. Inside, it was quiet except for a low humming. I stepped inside and swung the flashlight toward the sound. It was that boy. He was crouched in the corner with his back to me. He rocked slowly as he hummed the old tune in low rasps. I knew the tune. My grandma used to sing it at harvest time. I called out loudly, asked what he was doing. He stopped rocking. Everything paused for a few seconds, then he turned his head all the way around and grinned. His face was skinless. Where his face should have been, there was just raw meat and slick veins catching the light from my flashlight. Those wide eyes were still there, staring, but they sat wrong, sunken deep into exposed muscle. Something dark dangled from his mouth as he kept chewing. Then slowly, his jaw stretched open, and I could clearly see the limp wing of one of my chickens. He was eating my chickens alive. The thing was still moving inside his mouth. Blood covered his chin and neck, soaking into his shirt. Feathers clung to his face and fingers. When he smiled at me again, I watched the exposed tendons flex and pull beneath where his skin used to be. I don't remember dropping the flashlight. I just remember running back to the house like my life depended on it, because it did. I hit the door so hard it rattled the frame, threw the deadbolt, and grabbed for my phone with trembling hands. The 911 operator asked what the emergency was, and I tried to tell her about the boy, his face, and my poor chickens. I sounded insane even to myself. She said officers were on their way. I sat in my kitchen with every light on, clutching a knife from the drawer to my chest. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. 2 officers searched the property with their flashlights and radios. I watched from the window. When they came back, they told me the barn was empty, except for 3 dead chickens. All of them were torn apart. One was missing most of its flesh, eaten down to the bone. But they couldn't find any boy. Said there weren't any footprints except mine. They asked if I'd been drinking, if maybe I'd fallen asleep and had a nightmare. I showed them the feathers on the lawn and the blood in the barn, but they said coyotes could have done it. They told me to call if anything else happened and left. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, or the next. I kept seeing his hideous, inhuman face with its too wide smile for days. Couldn't walk into my kitchen without feeling his presence on the table where he sat playing with the food. It chills me to the bone to this day when I recall he said overcooking ruined the meat. I'm not even sure it was a human who showed up at my door that night. Maybe it was a skinwalker or something else, but definitely not a human. It was Thanksgiving, and the three of us were desperate to escape the family drama. So when Jake found this cabin somewhere in the old-growth forest online for dirt cheap, we jumped on it. We arrived Thursday morning and decided to hike before settling in for the night. The trail behind the cabin circled through dense woods. Ben led the way with his GPS, Jake complained about his cell service, and I took photos of the scenery. Everything was going all right. About an hour in, Ben stopped and said that he saw someone standing behind a big oak, maybe 50 yards off the trail. He claimed the dude was naked, except for a skirt made out of dried leaves, and maybe the lad was following us. But when Jake and I looked where he pointed, we couldn't see a thing. We laughed it off as one of Ben's filthy fantasies and kept moving. But about 10 minutes in, things started to get weird. We kept finding dead animal carcasses scattered on the trail. We saw a raccoon with its chest cavity open and the organs missing. A deer carcass hung upside down from a low branch, completely stripped of meat. Its bones were so clean, I could swear someone had licked them. It was filthy and disgusting, but nothing prepared us for the small bird skeletons hanging from the trees by thin threads, spinning slowly in the wind. They formed a pattern, like props for Halloween decoration. Jake said it screamed one of those cults crap he'd read on the dark web, about groups who venture out to remote forests to perform ceremonies. I suggested we head back, but Ben pointed out we were closer to the cabin than the car. We agreed to spend the night as planned and leave first thing in the morning. The trail eventually opened up to a clearing where the cabin sat. It was small and weathered, but sturdy enough. We unloaded our supplies, made dinner, and cracked open some beers. Soon, the animals and birds were out of our minds. By midnight, we were pretty wasted. Jake and Ben had passed out on the couch, watching the football highlights on Jake's phone, while I took the bunk bed. My eyes were already half closed when Ben got up and stumbled toward the door, whistling some made-up song about needing to pee. The outhouse was about 30 feet from the cabin, a rickety wooden structure with no roof. I'd used it earlier and hated it. It felt too open and exposed, sitting there with nothing but night sky above. I was drifting back to sleep when I heard Ben's scream. Jake and I both jolted awake and ran outside. The outhouse door was hanging open. Ben was lying unconscious on the ground. We dragged him back into the cabin and laid him on the couch. He was breathing but wouldn't wake up. Jake slapped his face lightly, called his name, and sprinkled some water. After a few minutes, Ben's eyes snapped open. He let out another scream and scrambled into the corner, shaking like a 4-year-old. For a while, he couldn't get any words out, just gasped and kept pointing towards the door. Finally, he managed to tell us what happened. He said he'd gone out to the outhouse and was just standing there, looking up at the stars while he finished. Then, as he went to flush, something wet dropped on his shoulder. At first, he thought it was sap, maybe some bird crap or rain starting up. But when he looked up again, he saw a bald-headed face with bright eyes staring down at him. It looked like the naked man from the trail, and he was taller than the outhouse ceiling, so tall that his neck was almost hunched, looming over the empty roof, staring down at Ben. He was drooling and panting like a dog. Ben said the man had razor-sharp teeth and was constantly salivating, staring at him like he was food. He screamed, and that's all he remembered before blacking out. Jake said Ben must have spooked himself, maybe saw a bear or a large owl, and his drunk brain filled in the rest. But Ben seemed pretty sober to me. The fear in his eyes was real. We locked every door and window, pushed furniture against the entrance, and turned on every light in the cabin. Suddenly, coyotes started howling from multiple directions at once. Like many of them were out there and they were circling the cabin. We sat in the living room with our backs to each other, watching the windows. Jake had grabbed a kitchen knife. I held a fireplace poker. Ben was clutching his steel water bottle. The howling continued for hours. And around 3 a.m, it stopped, only to be replaced by a woman's shrills and wails for help. Yes, something was calling for help. The voice felt too desperate to get us out of the cabin, but we didn't move. It continued for maybe 10 minutes. Then it stopped. We sat in silence until dawn started creeping through the windows. As soon as it was bright enough to see, we grabbed our stuff and ran to the car. We didn't bother packing properly, just threw everything in the trunk and got the hell out. The drive back was mostly silent, but as we passed the trailhead where we started hiking, I looked into the woods, and there, standing behind the same oak tree Ben had pointed at the day before, I saw a man. He was impossibly tall and almost naked, except for a skirt made out of dried leaves. His face was hidden behind the branches and shadows, but his red eyes shone through. And as we drove away, I could tell he was smiling. I didn't mention it to Jake or Ben. We never went back to those woods. Ben had to see a therapist for months afterward. But sometimes, late at night when I'm alone, I hear the howling. And I remember the way that thing looked at me from the trees with nothing but hunger in its eyes. I'd been looking forward to Thanksgiving at Uncle Robert's orchard all year. The place was beautiful in November, with those endless rows of apples stretching across rolling hills and crisp air smelling like earth and fruit. My cousin Emily and I were supposed to pick apples for the pies while the adults started cooking the grand Thanksgiving feast. We headed out around 6 a.m. when the sun was barely up. The orchard looked different in the early light. It was darker, with shadows between trees that seemed longer and deeper than usual. Emily brought 2 baskets, and we wandered down the rows as we compared apples and argued about which ones were best for pie. I was enjoying the moment when I suddenly spotted a woman standing about 30 feet away. She was hiding among the trees. At first, I thought she was one of the farmhands Uncle Robert sometimes hired for harvest season, but something about her felt awfully creepy. Her posture was too rigid, like she was trying too hard to look natural, and her stare felt too invasive. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw more details that made my stomach turn. Her hair was patchy and ripped out in clumps, leaving bare scalp visible in places. The skin on her face sagged weirdly, like it had been stretched over something that wasn't quite the right shape. She smiled at us, and it was the worst smile I'd ever seen in my whole life. Her mouth moved, but nothing on her face did. The flat and empty smile didn't reach her eyes. Emily grabbed my arm and whispered, "Let's go back to the house." Before we could move, the woman giggled and skipped closer to us. "Hi, girls. Would you like to play hide and seek with me?" I swear, her voice scared me. Panic hit me like ice water. Something about her felt deeply wrong. Emily and I started running without answering her. Behind us, I heard footsteps and giggles. She wasn't running, but skipping, and the sound bounced off the wet grass. We raced through the rows of trees, forgetting all about our baskets and the apples. Branches scraped our arms, and the cold morning dew soaked through our shoes and jeans, making every step heavier. My lungs burned. I risked a glance back and nearly fell over. She was closer than she should have been, moving between the trees in ways that didn't make sense. We'd run down row 7, but she appeared at the end of row 8, then suddenly behind us again. Emily was crying, gasping for breath. We cut through the rows diagonally, trying to lose her, but every time I looked back, she was there with her horrible, sagging face and empty smile. The farmhouse finally came into view. We tore out of the orchard and sprinted across the yard. Our shoes were soaked. It made the porch steps slippery. We climbed up, and I fumbled with the handle. It felt jammed shut. I tried again, harder this time. I looked over my shoulder, and she was right behind us, just a few feet away. I swear I could feel her cold breath on the back of my neck. Just as her fingertips brushed my hair, I yanked the door and we threw ourselves inside. I slammed the door and locked it. Emily collapsed against the wall, hiccuping. My aunt came out of the kitchen, asking what had happened, why we were back so soon. I opened my mouth, but words refused to come out, so I pointed a shaky finger at the window. The woman was right there, standing at the kitchen window with her face pressed against the glass. Her skin looked even worse now. It was pale and waxy, with patches that looked like they were peeling away. Her breath fogged the glass as she grinned. Then she raised one hand and waved at me. Her fingers were bent at unnatural angles. I screamed. My aunt rushed to the window, but by the time she looked, the woman was gone. Uncle Robert came running from upstairs, and my parents from the dining room. Emily and I were bombarded with questions we couldn't answer. We tried to explain what we'd seen, and they listened patiently, but I could tell nobody believed us. Uncle Robert said he didn't hire anyone this year, and the orchard was closed to outsiders. My dad suggested maybe we saw a scarecrow and got spooked in the early morning light, but Emily and I knew what we saw and had barely escaped. Uncle Robert walked out to the orchard with my dad to check. They came back 20 minutes later, saying they found our baskets with the apples, but they couldn't see anyone else. We spent the rest of Thanksgiving inside. I kept watching the windows, expecting to see her face pressed against the glass again. We left the next morning. My parents said I seemed shaken up, and maybe the country air wasn't agreeing with me. On the drive home, I stared out the back window at the orchard disappearing behind us. And there, at the edge of the trees, I saw her one last time. She was standing, still as a ghost. She grinned at me with a wave, as if we were best friends. That was 6 years ago. I'm 20 now, living in the city. I haven't been back to Uncle Robert's orchard since. Emily won't talk about it. Whenever I try to bring it up, she changes the subject or leaves the room. But sometimes, late at night, I dream of apple trees and walking through dark rows in the early morning. And in those dreams, I always hear the brittle voice behind me, asking if I want to play. I always wake up before I turn, because some part of me knows that if I see her face again, that stretched skin and empty eyes, I won't wake up at all. She'll still be there, pressed against the glass, grinning and waving for me to come back and play.
It all started over a year ago, living in my current small neighborhood. It was unusually hot in our house for October, and my sister figured it'd be a good idea to keep her window open for a bit of air. She was doing her homework and I was getting ready for bed when suddenly she burst into my room. She frantically says that she heard some noises outside, sounds of leaves crunching under a person's steps. I believed it to be an animal, so I walk into her room and stay there for not more than 5 minutes, till I hear leaves crunching. We quickly glance out the window, only to hear the sound of something running away in the woods. But that wouldn't be the end of the story. During the winter, I enjoy exploring the woods towards the back of my house, climbing trees and traveling further back to the fields. I remember the events very clearly. It had just snowed that night, the first snowfall of winter, and I was more excited than ever to head out there. I did so and climbed my usual tree to look out. I gave a cursory glance around me and at the ground when I noticed something strange. Footsteps leading away from my house. This wouldn't be weird as long as the front of the footsteps didn't end up pointing straight at my house and the origin of them came from a seemingly long off start. I tracked them down up to a point where there was a rusty wire fence covered in snow where they disappeared. October 2017. It started up again. I was laying in my bed pitch dark, not a light shining through my room when I heard it. My doorknob turning and my door creaking open. My heart stopped. Every single possibility of what it was rushing through my mind. Keep in mind, my door is always shut when I go to sleep. Since I was covered by my blanket, I quickly shot my sister a text. "Did you just come into my room?" She replied with a sharp, "No, I'm all the way in Hillard." My heart began pumping fast. I slowly snuck my hand under my pillow and grabbed my baton, sent a text to my dad, and waited. My dad came in mere minutes later with a knife, shot on the lights, and I jumped out of bed. Searched the entire house with nothing. Alarm set and all doors locked. Impossible. There's no way that happened. My dad and my mom were asleep, and a cat would have opened it much faster if it jumped to the doorknob. You best believe I didn't sleep a second that night. Fast forward to December, my relatives in town staying for a week in the basement. We turned on the alarm and all head to sleep. I stayed up gaming. In the morning around 2:30 to 3, estimated since I wasn't aware what had transpired, my uncle slowly opened his eyes with a feeling of being watched. His eyes adjusted a bit to the dark before he saw it. A guy, average height, scrawny, hair flowing in the wind and shivering looking inside their room through the window. My uncle screamed and they grabbed the baby before taking off upstairs. That morning I was informed what happened. I looked for footprints and saw only the smallest sign of a footprint. A front toe print made by what I could only assume was a sneaker. My uncle gave me more details without me telling him I looked for footprints, and he said the guy was leaning to the left looking in. The footprint matched his story. The left had a thin line of dirt anybody could have shimmied across. Now that leads to tonight, the night I could swear he or whatever it was had been in our house. I couldn't sleep. Life has been stressful lately, and I was up pretty much all night until I tried getting rest. Every night I've had string Christmas lights dimly light the room until tonight. I figured the lights must have been interfering with my sleep, so I unplugged them and headed off to sleep. Pillow over my head, I started to drift off until it happened. A quick strum of my guitar and the sound of something falling over, with a desperate attempt to stop it from hitting the ground, filled the room. This sound ignited my heart rate. Saliva developing at an extreme speed made it hard not to swallow. I could feel the presence of somebody in my room. Realizing I left my baton on my desk, I did the next logical thing. Pretend I was asleep. I tried and laid there for what felt like hours when in reality it was only a few minutes, until I heard a whimper come from my sister's room. Imagining this may be the day everyone in my family was silently murdered but me, I gathered all the courage I had. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and grabbed my baton. I busted into my sister's room and screamed, "Hey!" only to see that they were unharmed. My sister asked what the heck I was doing, and I just stood there, looked into the pitch black of my room and cried. I have never in my life felt the overwhelming emotion of believing my family was going to be taken from me until today. I sit here in my chair writing this in hopes to document my experiences and try to come to some logical conclusion. All I can come up with is that there are some guys stalking my family and perhaps sneaking into our rooms at night. If anything else happens, I'll post it to this thread. I'm gonna try to sleep now. This week has been hectic. My 3 kids have the flu. Oldest was first, then my younger 2 caught it. After a visit to the clinic, I was heading to the CVS down the street from our house for their prescriptions. I decided last minute to drop my kids off at home with their dad so they could rest, and I could go inside the store to pick up some Pedialyte. I consider our neighborhood to be safe. I've taken walks after dark and never felt afraid. Most of our neighbors are older folks who have lived there over a decade. When I pulled up to the CVS, I parked on the side parallel to our street. It's darker on that side, but the entrance is right around the corner and well lit. There was a man standing outside. He walked in front of my car and I could hear him talking, but my music was kind of loud. I figured he was on his phone or something. No real red flags yet. My husband called me as the man walked back towards the corner adjacent to the entrance. I got out of my car, still on the phone, telling my husband, yeah, the kiddos have the flu. I'm picking up medicine at the CVS, etc. In a very pleasant voice, the man says to me, "Hey, I got a question for you. You know where Main Street is?" I, assuming he is asking for directions or the location of something, tell him I do. I'm still holding my phone to my ear. It's in a bright pink case, so I'm sure he could see it. Now, this man is standing directly in front of me. There is a pillar and a trash can behind him. Around the corner is a propane cage and a red box against the store's wall. Getting past him would have put me in arm's reach. Next, he asks me for a ride there. To a homeless shelter. It's very cold outside and he doesn't want to freeze. I empathized with him, but I said I couldn't. I offered to buy him some gloves and or a blanket, and to ask if an employee in the store could assist him in finding a ride. This guy's face instantly changed to pure rage. Then right back to pleasant. Well, you know what happens to homeless people stuck outside. You're going to help me. It's right down the street. I'm standing there unsure what to do. My husband is on the phone asking me what's going on. I gently tell the man that I don't feel comfortable doing that and that I have the flu. I don't, and my husband is on the phone with me. "I don't care about the flu," he said. Now he's getting more angry and not moving away from my route into the store. I didn't want to turn my back on him to go to my car, which was several feet away in the dark. While this guy is glaring at me, I decided to quickly walk past him. I had my mask from the clinic in my jacket pocket, so I pulled that out and held it in front of me while I moved towards the trash can. He looked disgusted, but kept telling me that I needed to give him a ride, that it's right down the street, and kept insisting. But I know where that street is, and it's not as close as he says. He tried to guilt me, and his words felt threatening, but he didn't actually threaten me verbally. Once I was around the corner, I rushed into the store straight to the pharmacy. My husband said he's calling the police. He heard the way the man was talking to me and said to stay in the store. My knees were shaking. I'm not usually the type to be afraid when confronted. When I got to the pharmacy, I interrupted the pharmacist and a customer, apologizing, then told them what happened. The pharmacist sent the store manager out, a tall guy with a long beard, looked like he doesn't take crap from people. The police had already arrived. The man was told to leave, which he did momentarily. He came back inside the store yelling obscenities and something about me. Now the store manager has told him to get the heck out. He's trespassing on the property. The cop came back to talk to me and told me she has arrested him many times. He's loud and likes to yell at people, but he isn't violent. The pharmacist had me hiding behind the screen where they gave vaccines and left the half door to the pharmacy cracked open in case I needed to get out of there. The cop had also told me this guy's first and last name, as did the store manager. Is that normal? The prescriptions are finally filled and I leave the store. The police park next to my car to keep an eye on me. Oh, and the man refused a ride from the cop to the shelter. Later I looked him up. His name is unique, so he was easy to find online. Surprise, surprise, he has a long record spanning 3 states and several counties. Tons of public intoxication charges, DWI, urinating in public, assault and battery, and indecent exposure. I also looked up the homeless shelter. Yeah, as I thought, there isn't one where he wanted me to take him, but that area is super sketchy. Earlier today, I went to the corner store across from the CVS and told my friend, the overnight shift employee, what happened. She kicks him out of the store and calls the police every time she sees him because he yells and threatens customers. But he always takes off before the police arrive. I know I could have handled that better. I was blindsided by his instant shift from pleasant to filled with rage. But big thank you to the pharmacy team who kept me safe and the store manager for confronting the creep. They didn't have to do all that. I'm also thankful my husband recognized I was in an unsafe situation over the phone. That man is still out there somewhere in my area.
I was on a road trip a few years ago going back home from college. I had gone to a university that was a 10-hour drive from home. When I was done with school, I packed up my car and was on the way back. I never really brought that much stuff, but my car still had a lot in it. I drove this old car that was kind of in bad shape. It had a lot of miles on it and often had problems. But I was in college and didn't really have that much money, so I had put off getting it fixed. Also, because of not having much money, I was planning on driving home all in one day and not stopping at any hotels. After driving all day, I found myself only about 2 hours from home, but driving on some really quiet highway. There were mostly woods on both sides of the road, and things were very quiet as it was now 10 p.m. I was not that tired yet and was used to staying up late from being in college and stuff. So I continued with my driving and was just happy that I was almost back home. But then the engine started sounding real bad and my car ended up breaking down on the side of the road. My car came rolling to a stop and I didn't know what to do. There were really no other cars on the road. I took out my phone but wasn't getting a signal. This made things go from bad to worse. Now I really didn't know what I should do. I had no idea exactly where I was. I knew the general area, but did not know if there were any gas stations or stores nearby. I hadn't seen any signs, and as I was looking around, I didn't see any lights off in the distance or anything like that. Nothing indicating that there were businesses up ahead. I thought about getting out and walking, but who knows how long that would take. As I sat there, I was trying to get my phone to work. I didn't know another option. I knew that my car had problems, but I didn't know enough to try to fix it. There was no use in messing around with the engine or anything. If I did, I would probably just make things worse. After maybe 10 minutes of trying my phone, I figured that my best bet was to get out and walk. I couldn't think of anything else to do. Every minute or two, a car would drive by, but nobody stopped to help me. And I was not mad about that, because who knows who would be out driving on the roads late at night. It could be some creep or weirdo. Still, I was kind of nervous to get out of my car. It was so dark and quiet outside, and I didn't know how long I would have to walk for. I was nervous about people, but I was also nervous about animals as the woods was dense and there was lots of wildlife in the area. Then, just before I was about to go outside, I heard a knock at the back window of my car. It startled me and I'm sure that I jumped. When I looked back, I saw some guy standing by my rear passenger side window knocking on the window. I remember that the guy was balding and I had no idea where he had come from. It looked like he had just come straight out of the woods. He also had a bit of a beard and there was no car on the road behind me. Right next to me was a ditch to the right, and then the thick forest. I was not aware of anybody's property or anything like that either being nearby. I looked back to the man who now saw me, but he didn't say anything. He was just standing there. I didn't know what to do. I waved at him, but the guy didn't wave back or say anything. Then he tried opening the back door, which was locked. The guy then walked around my car to the passenger side and then around to the front of my car. During the whole time, he did not say anything at all. Then he arrived at my driver's side door and tried opening that. Then the guy started knocking at the window when the door didn't open because of it being locked, all the while not saying a word. I was so creeped out that I did the only thing I could think to do. I tried starting my car again, and miraculously, it started. I hit the gas and drove away from there. The man was left standing there on the side of the road. I got back onto the highway, and thankfully my car was able to make it all the way back home. After that, I took it to a shop and got it fixed, because I wasn't taking any more chances after that experience. Looking back, I think the guy came from the woods. I don't know where else he came from. What he was doing in there, I don't know, but I'm really glad that I got away from him. Two years ago, I took a road trip to Dallas, Texas. It was a long drive, and I planned to do as much as I could each day. One night I was driving and it got to be really late. I was tired, but I knew I could keep going. I just needed a quick pit stop. I had literally no idea where I was. The only thing I knew at that particular time was that I was on some random highway in either Arkansas or Oklahoma. It was a little after midnight and the roads were very quiet. I started looking around for a city or a place to stop. I was sleepy and also had to use the restroom. I had nothing left to drink and was out of snacks, but I knew if I could get some caffeine, I could drive for several more hours. Finally, after driving for like 10 more minutes, I saw a sign for a rest area up ahead. When it came up, I took the exit to the right and entered it. The rest area was very quiet and small. There was no other roads connecting to it. The rest area was just directly off the highway, and then the only option was to get back onto it. As for the rest area itself, it was just one long parking lot and then a small building. Surrounding it was a grass area and then lots of woods. There was also a wooded area between the rest area and the highway, so you couldn't see it from the road. I pulled into a parking space right in front of the building. I thought that this rest area looked pretty sketchy. It had just a few dimly lit streetlights going along the parking lot, and then one other one next to the building. The building also looked old and outdated. I considered just moving along and trying to make it to a town for another stop, but I thought about the drive. For like the last hour, I hadn't really come across any cities or much else. There was no telling how much farther I would have to drive before reaching something, plus the cell phone signal around there was spotty at best. And I knew that I needed something to drink, and this place probably had a vending machine at the very least. I looked around and saw that no other cars were in the parking lot at all. I didn't know whether to feel good or bad about this observation. On one hand, it was nice to have the place to myself and nobody else around, but on the other hand, it felt more creepy this way. As a smaller woman traveling alone, I was always trying to keep my guard up a little at night. I sat in my parked car and looked around. I didn't hear or see anything at all. I decided that it should be fine. I took my pepper spray just in case. So I got out of my car and then walked up the sidewalk into the building. I felt creeped out, but told myself not to be a wimp and there was nothing to be afraid of. After making it inside the building, there really wasn't much in there. The men's restroom was to one side and the women's to the other. Then there was a small lobby with a couple of vending machines and a few benches. I went in the restroom and was in there for maybe a minute. As I was washing my hands, I thought I heard footsteps inside the lobby. I realized that somebody else must have got there. I heard the footsteps go closer to the women's restroom that I was in, but the door did not open. The footsteps stopped right outside of it. Then someone started banging on the door very loudly. This was strange because the bathroom door did not lock. It was a bathroom where there were several stalls and sinks inside of it, so the door just swung open and could not be locked at all. I thought they would enter, but instead they just banged on it very loudly. I was very confused. For some reason, I didn't say anything though. The banging went on for maybe 30 seconds and it was really strange. Finally, it stopped. Then I heard footsteps walking away, and based on the footsteps, I guessed that it was a man. I'm not an expert, but they were louder and heavier and almost like work boots. I sort of heard the door open and realized that whoever was there was leaving. I was pretty creeped out by the whole thing. So I waited in the bathroom for about another minute and then left. I walked out of the bathroom with my pepper spray in hand. I looked around but didn't see anybody. When I left the rest area building and got back out into the parking lot, only my car was there. It was strange because I hadn't heard another car come or go. Even though I was in the building, I thought I would have heard that. Nevertheless, I walked out to my car and got back inside. I realized that I hadn't even gotten anything to drink or eat, but I felt that I no longer needed an energy drink. I was wide awake. Plus, I just wanted to get out of there at this point. I started my engine and began driving out of there. Now, the rest area parking lot narrowed at the end to a one-lane road. This went between the wooded area on both sides and then merged directly back onto the highway. As I was going to the end of the parking area and the road started narrowing, I suddenly saw something up ahead. I continued to drive, but then saw a man come out of the woods and go right onto the road in front of me. He was a good 50 feet ahead, but I had to slam on my brakes to avoid hitting him. The man had sort of long hair and a beard and was wearing a brown jacket, jeans, and what looked like work boots. Could this have been the man who was banging on the door? He stopped right in the middle of the road and now stood there, completely blocking my way. I stopped on the road and he just looked at me facing my direction. We were just staring at each other for what felt like a long time. It was probably about 30 seconds. I wanted to go around him, but there just wasn't enough space. The man started walking towards my car. I put it into reverse and began backing up. He didn't say anything or make any motions to me. He didn't wave or ask me to go around him or anything. As I backed up, he started walking faster. I realized that he was coming after me and I hit the gas harder. As I reversed more, the man started to run after me. I backed up all the way until I was in the parking lot. Then I turned the car around and started driving away. The man stood there back towards the end of the lot. If I wanted to leave, I would have to go past him. But then I decided to just go out the wrong way. I drove to the entrance and went along the one-way road there, going the wrong direction. If anybody had tried to enter the rest area from the highway in that moment, I would have possibly hit them head on. Thankfully, nobody was. I made it to the entrance and then did a sharp right turn and merged back onto the highway from there. Nobody else was on the highway at the time. Then I drove past the rest area. When I passed by where the rest area merged back onto the highway, as I was getting up to speed still, I saw the man again. He was standing on the side of the road just past the rest area exit, looking at me. I was so creeped out. I drove a ways and then called 911 and reported the guy. I was told that a police officer would go to the rest area and check it out. I never heard anything more. Looking back, I'm still wondering who that guy was and what he was doing. He definitely seemed to be up to no good. With just him and I alone in the rest area that night, it was a very creepy encounter.
I absolutely used to love Halloween. Not only dressing up as my favorite scary character, making horror-themed food, or putting up decorations. No, I loved the atmosphere that filled our neighborhood as it changed from its boring demeanor into something horrifying and exciting. My neighbor and best friend, Mark, was an even bigger fanatic than myself. Each year, he tried to make the best costume or scariest decoration, but despite our best efforts at becoming the Halloween Kings, we could never match up to Mr. Black. Mr. Black was a man of advancing age. He'd been widowed about a decade earlier, left behind by a vicious evil wife that treated the entire neighborhood like crap. The only thing she ever loved was Halloween, and she'd make damn sure all the attention was directed at herself each year, on October 31st. When she died, I almost felt relieved for the poor man. Still, for reasons beyond my comprehension, he decided to keep his abusive wife's tradition alive. Each year, he'd come up with the most gruesome display of nightmare-inducing decoration. His entire house would be transformed into one of absolute mind-bending horror. He'd build a pool of blood in his garden, or he'd cover the entire house with cobwebs, unleashing a horde of spiders just to prove that he could. It was as beautiful as it was disgusting. How he constantly managed to outdo himself brought great joy to the rest of the neighborhood. Unfortunately, Mark couldn't stand it. He's a damn attention seeker. Always has to be in the spotlight. Every Halloween, he said. For years, Mark had tried to outdo Mr. Black. He'd spent thousands of dollars in preparation, planning for months ahead of time, only to be blown out of the water by Mr. Black. What was even weirder was that each time it would only take Mr. Black a day to set everything up, which enraged Mark beyond anything else in life. In 2017, Mark even resorted to renting animatronics that resembled crawling corpses. He littered his yard with the things, letting them scream and pull themselves around. He was so confident that year. And even as the 30th of October rolled around, Mr. Black still hadn't put up any decorations. When we went to work the next day on Halloween itself, Mark was beyond himself with joy. He'd finally done it, and he just wouldn't shut up about it. It wasn't until we got home later that day that we saw the horrors taking place in Mr. Black's front yard. In the span of 8 hours, he turned it into a literal graveyard. Muffled screams were coming up from the grounds, with bells that were attached to strings, leading into buried coffins. They rang as people gathered around in awe of the sight. Those brave enough to traverse his yard were invited inside for a tour. Mark and I joined and quickly realized that Mark's pathetic animatronics were nothing in comparison. Because inside the living room, Mr. Black had created a makeshift morgue, full on with mortuary refrigerators that rumbled around as if people were trapped inside. Mark was pissed, to say the least. He couldn't believe it, and to be fair, neither could I. He swore then that he'd figured out how the heck Mr. Black managed to pull off these incredible feats, each and every year, at such an advancing age and without any help. How does he do it? Have you ever seen any trucks or workmen outside his house? Mark asked. I chuckled. Nah, but come on, he's retired. He probably gets it done while we're at work. Still, Mark didn't believe it. That guy's up to something. Next year, I'm going to stay at home and figure it out. A year passed, and Mark actually remained true to his word. On the 31st of October 2018, he called in to work sick. I sighed once I found out, surprised at how seriously he was taking it. Then at around noon, I got a frantic and excited voice message from Mark. I knew it. I freaking knew it. You won't believe what I just found. Mr. Black is a depraved monster. I'm going to call the voice message was cut short, so I tried to call back. No response. After the 5th or so missed call, I started to get worried. There is absolutely no way Mark would have given me any peace if he truly found something. But no matter how many times I tried to call him, I just got a busy signal. By the end of the workday, I was truly scared for him. Mark was never that silent. I needed to figure out what was going on. As soon as I returned home, I went over to Mark's place where I proceeded to hammer on his door. His wife was the one to answer, and she too seemed worried. "Police, is Mark here?" She frowned. "He went out to run some errands a few hours ago, but I haven't heard from him since. I thought maybe his phone died, but he should have been back home by now." Mark hadn't told her about his plan to investigate Mr. Black, mostly because she would have been mad. But I had to come clean. If he was truly missing, we need to call the police. While Elise explained the situation to the cops, I went over to talk to Mr. Black myself. It was already getting late. Both children and adults had gathered in front of his house, ready for the yearly tour of horror. That year, his yard had been turned into a field of tall grass. It was so dense we could hardly see his front door. All we could see amid the field were makeshift scarecrows. Mr. Black hadn't let anything go to waste. As we entered his yard, the air filled with the stench of rotting flesh. It wasn't unusual for him to utilize all 5 senses, but this was extreme. "Mr. Black, you have a moment?" I asked. "In a minute, old friend. After the tour," he just shouted back as he led the people inside his home. I remained outside, disturbed by the odd smell. I moved some of the grass apart to inspect the scarecrows. They were horrifying, covered in old rags with bits and pieces of skin visible through the holes. They didn't even look like props. After a moment of hesitation, I reached out to pull off the scarecrow's mask. What I saw sent me falling to the ground in shock. That scarecrow wasn't a prop, nor a doll. It was an actual corpse. "Oh man," was all I managed to get out as I stared at the decomposing body. Once I'd partially regained my senses, I started checking the other scarecrows. Most of them were beyond rotten, skeletal corpses that had been perished long ago. But once I reached the last one, I immediately recognized the clothes. With a trembling hand, I reached to take off the mask. It was Mark. His throat had been slit, and he'd been turned into a flesh-filled scarecrow. I stood before the body of my former best friend in shock. All these years, Mr. Black had created what seemed like impossibly realistic decorations, but it had all been real. The blood, the cadavers, the screaming. We'd all been oblivious to it. The police arrived shortly after, alerted by Mark's wife. They quickly stormed the house and escorted all the guests outside, but Mr. Black himself was gone, and he was never seen again. I actually don't celebrate Halloween anymore, nor does anyone else in my neighborhood. For us, the 31st of October is just a painful memory of what we let happen under our noses. But if you see a new neighbor with decorations that seem just a tad too realistic, stay away from them. It might be Mr. Black. It was my turn to take my kids trick-or-treating. The previous year was my wife's, and we trade back and forth every year. My son and daughter are aged 7 and 9. Usually I stay on the street while my kids go up to the different houses to collect candy. After about half an hour of walking around, we came to one of the more popular hotspots for candy collecting. A main street in the neighborhood. Lots of really cool decorations and animatronics on people's lawns. So I became a bit distracted and stopped watching my kids as closely. At one point, they came back from a house accompanied by another girl, about the same height as my daughter. She was wearing a weird homemade mask, like a cardboard cutout or something. My daughter asked me if she could trick-or-treat with us, so I said sure, and we carried on together as a group. I didn't know who this girl was, but I figured she was a friend from school. As we continued, I started to notice a large man trailing us. He was wearing some sort of angry cat mask. It was kind of creepy, to be honest. I thought that maybe he was the father of the girl, so I tried to start up some small chit-chat with him. I said something like, "Nice weather, huh?" But he didn't respond. He just stood there staring at me while our kids went up the stairs to the next house. I tried again, asking, "Hey, is that your daughter?" He nodded but didn't say a word. I figured he just wasn't in the mood for chatting, so I stopped trying. We carried on for about another 15 minutes until suddenly my kids came up to me and said they wanted to go home. This really surprised me as we hadn't been out for too long and their bags were only about a third full. In any case, I agreed, waved goodbye at the man in the cat mask and his daughter, and started on our way home. The weird thing is that when I glanced back, the man and his daughter were just standing there, staring at us. I checked one more time as we turned the corner, and they were still standing there, not having moved at all. At this point, I decided to ask my kids, "So, who was that girl?" My daughter looked up at me with a confused look on her face. "She's your friend," my daughter replied. I asked her what she meant. Apparently, the girl with the cardboard mask approached them and said she was a friend of mine. She told my daughter she was too shy to ask me if she could join us to trick-or-treat and wanted my daughter to ask me instead. I laughed at this story and replied to my daughter, "Why would you think she was my friend? I don't have any children friends." What my daughter said next chilled my bones. According to her, when the girl with the cardboard mask approached them for the first time, she wasn't wearing the mask, so they were able to see her face. As it turns out, she wasn't a girl at all, but an older woman around my age, with wrinkles on her face. What's even more disturbing is that the old woman had started to steal treats from my daughter's bag, apparently when I wasn't looking. This is why they asked me to go home. The old woman was creeping them out, and they wanted to just get away from her. I brought my kids home and told my wife what had happened. We made sure to check through all their candy, but didn't find anything suspicious or off. We didn't call the police or anything, since nothing technically really happened, but thinking back, I kind of regret that decision now. What the heck was that old woman doing, and who the heck was that man following us around? I don't think I'll ever know. I just think it's sick that there are people out there on Halloween hiding behind masks, pretending to be children. This is the perspective of my story, told by me and, in part, by a friend. This happened to me the weekend of Halloween, and I personally don't like talking about it much, but I've been told by my friend to share it to get it off my chest. I and a friend were invited to a house party just for college students in the richer area of the town, so the house was huge with an acre of land and pool area. This party was themed to be a little naughty, so my friend dressed in a nurse outfit, and I dressed as a belly dancer. The majority of the party took place in the house, as there were maybe like 70 people, with the house being very spacious, so it was not too difficult to get around. I'm not much of a drinker, but I did have some juice that was available. Some friends pulled me and my friend over to take some pics, and I set my drink down. After what felt like an hour of just taking pictures, I found my cup and took another sip, not even worrying that I left my cup alone for a while. Then a man came up to me who looked to be in his late 20s or early 30s. He said my boyfriend's name and said that he's been trying to call me. That's when I realized I didn't have my phone on me. I have loads of respect for my boyfriend, so we always make sure to stay in contact with each other, and since he had to work, I promised I would contact him, but I just forgot. The man said it's urgent and said I can use his phone to call in one of the rooms. So not thinking at all, I followed the man. If my boyfriend really wanted to call me, then I knew it would be something terrible. As we entered the room, I felt as if I had just run a mile and felt winded. The man closed the door behind me and sat me on the bed and gave me his phone. I started to feel weaker, like I just got a migraine and couldn't call. Then I was helped to lie down, and within seconds I was out cold. I woke up later, not sure where I was or what even happened. I found my friend rubbing a napkin on my tummy while yelling. It took me a bit to come back to reality, and I realized I was in the bedroom with my friend cleaning some stuff off of me. That's when I had a panic attack and just realized that I quite possibly been assaulted. My friend calmed me down and told me that didn't happen. She explained that she couldn't find me anywhere and assumed I went to the bathroom. But after some minutes, I still didn't show, so she went looking for me. Eventually checking the bedrooms and finding me lying on the bed with a guy, something out of my belly button. Apparently, he was playing shots with my unconscious body by sucking alcohol out of my belly button and licking salt from my chest. She didn't know how long this went on for, but I immediately felt sick and even coughed up from just the thought. Thankfully, my boyfriend got off work early after my friend told him what happened. He picked me up while my friend asked around about the guy, but, of course, nobody knew of him or recognized him. I was taken to urgent care and looked at. Thankfully, nothing was wrong with me, and the drug in my drink didn't cause any further harm than just knocking me out. I wish the story ended here, but I started to receive texts from a random guy. First, he was just asking me random things, and I just didn't reply. But then he showed me a pic of my torso and started saying creepy things to me, and even giving me the impression he's stalking me. And this is still going on today. Just text me randomly. I've had the idea to try to bait him one of these days to finally have backup to catch him, but I don't know how smart he can be and what he will do to me if things don't go as planned. Let me clarify. This happened during my college's Halloween celebration a few years ago and is the most terrifying experience of my life. One of my roommates, some friends and myself left to go to a party around dusk and were catcalled by a group of 3 drifters or homeless people. We thought nothing of it and went on our merry way. About 4 hours later, we're going back to our apartment to change shoes. High heels and messed up streets are hell when you've been drinking. When one of the drifters calls out to me, "Hey beautiful, how about a kiss?" Me being a little drunk and sassy, I reply, "No thanks, girls are more my type." To my shock and horror, he says, "Hey, my friend here likes the ladies." A homeless girl comes out of nowhere and proceeds to kiss me. My friend then picks me up and throws me over his shoulder. I proceed to flip the heck out of my apartment, shrug it off, and we venture back out. Well, I got separated from my group in the crowd, and I see the three drifters again. I try not to show that I'm shitting bricks when they ask me where they can find a liquor store. I point them down the street to a Kroger, and they say, "Okay, you can show us." I'm a small woman, and they shoved me into their vehicle. I think naively at the time that they will literally let me out of the grocery store, except it's closed because it's after midnight. I plead for them to let me out of the car, but they keep saying, "The power does what it wants," and headed away from the safety of the campus area, onto the freeway and out of the state. For the next 4 hours, I visited 3 states with them, while pleading for my life. I'll never forget how they kept saying, "The power does what it wants," and talking about how they're going to have fun with me. I kind of resigned myself to the fact that I was going to die, that I would never graduate college or see my family again. They pulled into a gas station, and I slipped out of the vehicle to be grabbed again, but I screamed my head off for the clerk to help. That's when they talked about taking me to the cliff. I mentioned that my family is full of police officers and that they're probably already looking for me, how they're committing a federal crime, and that I won't press charges if they take me back to campus. I guess that's when the girl started to feel sorry for me, because she started to say, "Guys, he's really scared. Maybe we should just drop her off somewhere. This doesn't have to get any worse." They took me back to the campus area, and as soon as the girl pulled me out of the car, a police officer called my name. The girl shoved me toward the cop and yelled, "The power does what it wants, and tonight I'll let you live." I've never been so happy to sit in a cruiser. They pursued them, but I don't know if they were ever caught. My roommate dropped out of college and joined the military, and I transferred to another school. So, ladies and gentlemen, please be careful walking at night. Always keep your cell phone with you if possible, and call the police if you see suspicious people near your apartment. I had a brush with death that day, and I'm just so grateful for the time I have now. This could have been written better, but it's still so hard to talk about. This happened when I was 12 and my brother was 17, and is truly proof that the living are more terrifying than the dead. I think about this every Halloween. This is not a paranormal story. The community I grew up in was made mostly of Hispanic people, so the folklore of La Llorona was very popular in the area, and especially around Halloween. For those of you who don't know, the myth is basically a story about a woman who married a rich man, had a perfect life, and then the man cheated on her. She was so distraught that she took her children to the river and drowned them. After she died herself, but she couldn't pass on to the afterlife without her children, the myth is that she roams the river looking for her kids. If she spots living children, she will grab them and drown them to take them to the afterlife with her. The story is meant to keep kids from playing in the river. Most of my friends that year were too cool and grown up to go trick-or-treating that year, and were planning on having a party instead. I was really disappointed and asked if my brother would take me trick-or-treating. He agreed, and we went while it was still light outside, so I'd be able to make it to the party before the end of the night. Since we had gone too early, there weren't a lot of people ready to hand out candy, so after a disappointing trek, we started walking back home. On our way home, we passed by a park that had a river running next to it. On Halloween, older teens would usually wait at this park to try to see if they could spot La Llorona. Waiting to spot her at this particular park was a well-known town tradition that people had done for decades, and that still continues to this day. However, there were no kids or teens there yet because it was still kind of early. But there were people in the park putting on a Llorona play. We decided to stop and watch it. There was not really much of an audience. It seems like it was just us and another few kids who were part of the group putting on the play, who were not in costumes and didn't even have trick-or-treating buckets with them. When we sat down, a woman approached us and asked if we were trick-or-treating. I told her we were, and she dropped a small comic book in my trick-or-treat bag and smiled. She seemed very kind and welcoming. The play started, and I got the weird feeling that something was off. The woman playing La Llorona pointed my brother and me out in the tiny audience and asked us what religion we are, to which my brother responded, "Roman Catholic." She then told us that La Llorona was also a Roman Catholic and was burning in hell for her sins and rejecting Jesus. She then told us that Halloween was an evil holiday and everybody who celebrated would burn forever. The play progressed to getting weirder and weirder and included a scene where La Llorona started talking about abortion and held up a fake fetus and pretended to eat it. My brother and I got up to leave, but the people stopped us and started yelling at us to sit down, but we kept going. They started following us down the street, and my brother grabbed my hand and started running because he was afraid they were going to harm us. We finally got to our street, and only about 3 people were still following us. yelling at us about how we were going to go to hell and we needed to accept Jesus. My brother and I went inside quickly, and he locked the front doors and then frantically ran around the house, making sure all doors and windows were locked, before he called our dad at his office. Our dad told us to call the police and that he'd be home in about 15 minutes. When my dad got home, the people were still outside chanting and singing some prayer song, asking God to save my brothers and my soul. My dad shooed them away and told them the police would be there any second. They were not deterred and stayed there chanting until the police showed up and threatened to arrest them. I was so freaked out by the events that I decided I didn't want to go to the party and instead just wanted to organize my Halloween candy and put aside all the Snickers for my brother as a thank you for taking me trick-or-treating. Snickers were his favorite. My mom ordered pizza and we sat down to watch Halloween Town while I went through my trick-or-treat bag. I was halfway through sorting my candy when I came across the comic book that the lady had dropped in there. I opened it up and it truly horrified me. It was a propaganda comic about a little boy who went to a haunted house, ended up being hit by a car on the way home, and went to hell because he hadn't found Jesus. I was really scared, and for weeks as a child I had nightmares about the event and the comic book. Years later I asked my mom if she remembered it, and she told me that she couldn't forget and that she and my father had called the police over it several times. Apparently, for years, the group would leave envelopes with mine and my brother's names written on them with different weird creepy comic books and handwritten notes about how they were praying for us. Also invitations to join them in their church and weird promises about baking us cakes and other creepy ways to entice our child selves into their church. To this day, we can't figure out how they knew our names or who wrote the letters. It really creeps me out that they did this.